開始啦！我應該咧就 mute 咗隻 game 嘅聲嘅，咁就費事阻到一間睇呢一個嗰個聲重疊咗，唔係咁好。咁如果一間聽聽下有咩地方你想我停低去解釋嘅話咧，就單聲俾我聽。咁啊，順手咧，因為我其實上次睇嗰陣時咧就病到暈暈頓頓嘅，唔係好記得裏邊有啲咩內容。你哋聽過上一集 podcast 寫咗明㗎啦。咁就喺度打住圖，聽住呢一個，然後睇下有啲乜嘢嘢可以 gather 到 from 呢一次嘅 podcast。好，開片。
All right, so you did your little introduction there. That's great. So just so everyone is kind of on the same page, this is Jonathan Rogers. He's one of the directors for POE2, and you've been quite busy doing a round of interviews with many people at many events, spreading the word about the features in the upcoming game that many of us are dying to try. So we did an interview at ExileCon. There's been a few announcements since, but I've noticed that you've actually been really active on the Path of Exile 2 subreddit, answering questions of just about anyone that has one for you. It's been kind of difficult for me to kind of compile all that information, so maybe I'm going to ask a question that has been asked already. My goal is to ask new questions. It's just a very, very difficult task because the information isn't really, like, there's a wiki, but even the wiki has some info wrong. Like, I actually had a question about the crafting bench being removed, but apparently you've actually addressed that.
呢一個真係 crafting bench 呢一個，佢話喺 wiki 嗰度寫錯咗，但係我哋其實係明明喺 ExileCon 嗰陣時見到佢哋講話 remove 咗個 crafting bench， 所以呢個唔係 wiki 嘅錯嚟嘅，呢個係佢哋當時俾錯咗消息我哋，咁我哋就只能夠聽，只能夠咁樣寫嘅啫，唔係 community 嘅錯，絕對係 dev 嘅錯咯，我可以話你知。
Recently on Reddit, so again, and of course with all of this information, with the game still being in development, I hope people understand that you'll just be giving your best answer from what you can share with us, and nothing is final. 呢一點亦都好緊要，就係佢依家知嘅同真係出嘅未必一定一樣，因為始終仲有咁多時間佢哋可以慢慢發展。 That I kind of put together. And then I have a number of questions that I saw unanswered on Reddit, on actually just a few YouTube videos. I pulled some questions from chat, and we will pull further questions from chat as we go throughout the segment. But yeah, so it should be a pretty good segment. So first, I kind of wanted to dive and talk a little bit about the last trailer that you had, which was the Mercenary trailer. In that, you announced that you have WASD movement. And I tried to kind of imagine this, like, you know, how I would play with it. It feels like I would, a lot of the time, not want to go exactly right or exactly left or exactly up or exactly down. And with the keyboard, it's maybe a little bit difficult to actually combine that. Now, I know some people really wanted this feature, so you're bringing it to them. But I have to imagine, is this more tailored for like a controller-style gameplay?
So that wasn't our initial thinking. It was just when I was, you know, trying out the Mercenary. So this had been suggested in our studio a long time ago, to be clear, right? Like, there's people have been saying, hey, maybe we should do this for a while. And I was kind of always on the idea that this is something we should try, but it never was kind of like the right moment to do it, because it is quite a complicated thing to actually fully pull off. And then when we were doing mercenary stuff, I was kind of like, okay, we have some of the preconditions we needed to actually to go and try it. So the other thing as well, of course, is like people in the community have been keen for ages. So then I was just like, you know what, let's give it a shot. And I wouldn't say that controller was really the first thing on my mind. It was, but I mean, obviously the improvements we make, I'm sure, will benefit controller. But it really was just like how can I make this class feel good? And kind of generally my feeling is that, you know, whatever it takes to make the combat feel good is what we will try. It's kind of just one of those things that happen that way. I don't think that the limitation of having only 8 directions with WASD is particularly a problem in practice. It seems to kind of just be fine, just for me playing anyway. That hasn't really been an issue. And because the character always sort of looks towards where your mouse is. It doesn't honestly even really feel like a directional movement because the character can technically kind of walk in any direction relative to where they're facing. So you end up kind of just completely forgetting the fact that it's actually eight directional, and it just kind of works.
Well, since you have tried it.
復述翻佢，我唔知你想唔想我翻譯翻佢哋啱乜啦。如果冇必要嘅話，你哋可以喺 chat 度話翻俾我知，直接就咁聽，唔使停就得。Anyways， 佢頭先Kripparian 就係問到底嗰個 WASD movement 係咪因為為咗呢一個 class 所以先至特登整啊？定係點解無啦啦會有一個 WASD movement 咧？跟住 Jonathan 就話啦，基本上佢哋呢一樣嘢咧就係個 community 啊，即係玩家社群裏邊已經要求咗好多年嘅嘢嚟㗎啦。咁樣喺佢哋特別喺佢哋製作 mercenaries 嘅時候啦，佢哋就發覺可能可以考慮下用呢一個因素去加入落去，令到個打鬥咧有咁完善得咁完善，所以咧就加咗佢入去。而另一個問題咧就係話，到底 WASD 因為你可以實質上喐到嘅淨係得8個方向啦 ，WASD 4個啦，跟住然後其餘嗰堆組合鍵咧，即係可能 WA 咁樣就可能係左上咁樣，會唔會有一個好大嘅限制咧？玩上係點嘅咧？阿 Jonathan 就話咧，因為佢哋依家行緊嘅時候，你同一時間你亦都可以攞隻 mouse 指向性咁樣打，即係例如我依家行緊嚟呢邊，但係個 mouse 可以指上去上邊打嘅話咧，咁所以咧就導致到其實你唔會覺得嗰個限制係太大嘅。Anyways， 繼續 play 啦。
And I guess you're probably one of the only ones who has tried it. Are you a convert? Are you going to be a WASD enjoyer moving forward in POE2?
I'm pretty sure I am, yes. I was actually very skeptical outside of range. Like my first, when we were talking about it, I was like, okay, this is going to be a thing for range. I don't think melee is going to be that great. And actually the reason why I thought that is there was this game, what was it called? I don't think it ever actually released. It was in beta. It might have been called like Pagan Online or something like that. From ages ago, and they had WASD movement in an action RPG, and I really hated it. I thought that the movement felt really terrible, the combat felt terrible, and so I was kind of imagining that we would have the same problem with our melee. But then what I found was when I actually tried that out, is that it actually felt really good, and I think the reason is because of the step attack stuff we have. What that means basically is that when you attack, we have different animations. Depending on whether you're moving at the time and also depending on whether there's a monster that's like where the monster is relative to you. So we've got animations of the character sort of stepping forward, and the key thing we're trying to do there is to make it so that you never lose momentum on your character. So it feels really bad if your character just kind of comes to a stop and then attacks.
Yeah.
And so by adding these extra animations, it allows us to make the character feel like they're kind of flowing forward and then going into the attack. So because we have those, I think it actually drastically improves how melee combat feels with WASD, and I actually am a fan of it. I think it feels pretty damn good.
Well, I guess I'll have to give it a try. I was skeptical as well, but on your recommendation, I guess more of us will perhaps be more open-minded on it. Now, since you
啱啱呢一部分咧，就係佢問啊喺。即係基本上其實咁多個人裏邊，可能淨係得內部嘅人係試過呢個 WASD 嘅啫。即使去過 Gamescom 嗰度試玩，去咗 PAX 試玩，又或者去咗 ExileCon 試玩，因為 WASD 當時咧都仲係未係一個 function 嚟嘅，或者未俾我哋試用嘅，所以咧冇人係試過㗎。咁到底係 Jonathan 佢自己本人試玩完 WASD 之後，佢滿唔滿意咧？佢會唔會自此之後就變咗做由 keyboard mouse 變咗做呢一個 WASD 嘅控制玩法咧？Jonathan 就話其實佢一開頭整 WASD 嘅時候咧，特別係對近戰咧，佢係非常之擔心嘅。佢覺得一定唔會嗰個感覺一定唔會好嘅，始終好似好大限制咁樣。但係佢話可能就係因為佢哋本身前置已經整好咗一堆唔同嘅動畫啦，特別係佢哋近戰嘅時候啦，唔再係好似 POE1 咁樣，即係例如我依家要過嚟呢度打嘅話，我就必須要行到過嚟，然後先至可以打除，而係我可以一路行嘅時候，個角色同時起手，令到啦成個畫面或者成個動作啦變得非常之流暢，即使係用緊 WASD 控制都好啦，其實咧就冇咁大嘅，冇佢一開頭所想嗰個問題咁大，甚至乎咧佢覺得係幾好用嘅添，而且咧佢亦都話咧佢咧就已經基本上係幾中意用呢一個 WASD 嘅玩法㗎啦。咁Kripparian 就話佢原本咧都幾擔心同埋都幾點講咧，都幾 質疑到底 WASD 呢一樣嘢係咪真係 work 嘅咧？咁聽完阿 Jonathan 講之後咧，佢可能都會俾 WASD 一試。如果以我自己嚟講嘅話咧 ，Hello Noco， 咁樣以呢一個我自己嚟講啦，係啦，如果我一開頭見到咧，我就覺得係近戰會係非常之差，但係我相信玩遠攻啦 ，WASD 咧基本上咧，你淨係會覺得好玩嘅啫。而我相信啦，我喺 POE2 開嘅時候，又或者去 beta 啦，如果入到 beta 嘅話咧，就應該會特登係開一隻遠攻嚟試下 WASD 先。因為我自己本身咧就唔係咁中意喺 POE 裏邊玩遠攻嘅啫，因為各種原因。但係呢個 WASD 變咗好似第三身射擊嘅玩，變咗好似第三身射擊嘅玩法嘅時候咧，就應該會有所改變。而如果我可以喺呢一個情況之下習慣咗嗰個控制方式嘅話咧，或者習慣咗個輸入模式嘅話咧，咁可能咧就對之後玩近戰咧都有所幫助嘅。如果你哋同我一樣都係半信半疑，唔係好肯定到底 WASD 會唔會適合你嘅話咧，我建議你哋 POE 出嘅時候又好，或者你哋有幸入到去 beta 都好啦，就可以好似我咁樣攞個遠攻，好似即係傭兵咁樣試一試手感。到時啦，你習慣咗之後咧，要再用其他技能嘅話咧，就應該易好多噶啦。好，繼續play啦。
Mentioned there's like a more of an active flow of combat. The mercenary also has, in addition to the instant attacks, something that kind of caught my eye was the attacks while moving.
Correct.
Now, the closest thing we have to this is some form of cyclone or cyclone triggering other skills in Path of Exile 1. And with cyclone actually being a pretty poor skill otherwise, it still has this mainstay in the game just because it can be used while moving. Is this going to be like a full attack while moving, or is it like cyclone-ish where you have certain movement penalties? Like, is there something you can elaborate on that? And maybe if this is something more than just what the mercenary will have?
Yeah, so
pause 呢度先。呢條問題有啲長啊。佢就係話喺傭兵嗰條片裏邊啦，我哋見過傭兵可以一路攻擊一路行啦。以往咧喺 POE1 裏邊其實就淨係得 cyclone 啦，喂，好似幾正。以往就係得 cyclone 啦，即係旋風斬啦，先至可以有呢一樣嘢嘅啫。咁到底呢一個一路攻擊一路行嘅嘢係淨係傭兵先可以做到啊？淨係佢嗰一招技先可以做到啊？定還是係點樣嘅咧？佢就想 Jonathan 澄清一下啦。
On rapid shot in particular, basically you just get a 50% move penalty while you're doing it. So just whatever your movement speed is, it'll be halved during rapid shot, and that sort of tends to feel pretty reasonable. This is something that I'm keen to do more of with other skills in the game. I think it actually makes the pace of combat feel faster when you can sort of begin attacking before you arrive at your next pack, or just sort of otherwise having something to do while you're retreating. So I kind of quite like the feel of that, and so I'd like to do some of that as well. But I don't want to make it to the point where every skill you can just do while moving, because I think that results in very floaty combat that I don't really like. So in particular for melee, you kind of have to make sure you're splitting the difference a little bit of where you need to make sure, like what I think can be good is that you can kind of ease it into, like you start an attack, and during the start of that attack, you've kind of got movement that can be controlled, and then there's kind of a part where the movement control you have tones down to potentially 0 for at least a little while, and then back into having movement again towards the end, and that kind of thing can kind of allow you to have like the feeling of you're still able to do a lot of control even in melee. But also I think for other ranged classes as well, it can be good to have just a few options. Not necessarily a lot of options, but at least a few options that allow you to be done while moving. There's just certain things I think that can feel really good from that. And so we have been experimenting with other classes and other skills as well. Like we think there are certain skills that can really benefit from that kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely something I want to do more of.
So I kind of wanted to ask this.
啱啱呢一條問題問咗啦，跟住佢嗰個答案就係話佢係嗰一招技啦，係可以一路行一路攻擊嘅。而嗰招技本身咧，就係如果你行住攻擊嘅話咧，就係有一個減50% 移速嘅懲罰嘅。而且咧，佢就話啦，呢一個咧係個別某幾招技，唔係一個升華限制啦，亦都唔係一招 近攻或者遠攻嘅限制嚟嘅。近攻會有一啲技能都可以做到類似嘅效果，遠攻亦都會有一啲技能可以做到呢一類型嘅效果。但係佢咧就並唔係所有技能都可以做到呢一種效果嘅，因為如果特別係近攻咧，佢話如果所有技能都可以一路行住一路攻擊嘅話咧，成個感覺咧就好似你個人好浮咁樣啊，即係好似線嚟線去咁樣嘅攻擊，睇上去咧嗰個動作唔夠真實，唔夠貼地啊，咁就唔係咁好。等等啊，呢幾隻嘢我好似打得有啲辛苦。Anyways, 應該
later,
會
but
死
I'll
嘅。
jump to it now since you've touched upon it. One thing that I feel isn't super cut and dry in the presentations for the classes is what is attributed to the class and what is attributed to the skill. Because people, when they're seeing Path of Exile 2, they often forget that I hope it's still true anyway, that skill gems are just skill gems and can be used by any class. So the idea of attacking while moving when watching like the mercenary trailer, I guess the viewer doesn't know for sure if it's something that the mercenary gets or if it's something that's attributed to the skill.
呢條問題好簡單啫，到底佢哋所睇到嘅嘢暫時係升華限定定係乜嘢限定
plus the starting position on the tree, right? So, and that's still true in POE2. It's just that whenever we're presenting like content, especially when we've got like an audience we expect to have a lot of new players in, we kind of tend to want to keep to the stereotypes and kind of not like go into that other side of things too much, because I think it just confuses the issues. And really, when you're presenting a class to someone, what you're kind of presenting to them is some kind of vision for what type of a character they might want to be. And so that tends to be what we focus on. But of course, I mean, at the end of the day, like it is still very much my preference to have everything be as much as possible, like have interesting combos from other stuff. And we still have that very much like Magic the Gathering style idea of, you know, hey, you can splash for another color. There's other, you know, like use things off attribute, that kind of stuff. It's still very important to me. So yeah.
好，答咗呢一忽先。呢個係打寶收益好，真係好誇張。呢個係打寶收益真係好誇張啊！誇張到喺呢一條訪問稍後佢都話係唔正常地多。朋友已經打咗2條 Mage 啦，唉，跌鏡嘅跌鏡咁貴，好誇張啊！真係。不過 anyways 翻去啱啱啊 Jonathan 所講嗰樣嘢先 ，Jonathan 就話佢喺 POE2 裏邊啦，因為展示嘅片咧全部都係假設緊一啲未接觸過 POE 嘅玩家，對佢哋嚟講咧最容易理解嘅咧就係一個角色可能會有一啲特定嘅技，但係咧其實 POE2 同 POE1 咧根本上咧都仲係一隻 POE 嚟嘅，你嘅角色咧只不過係限制咗你開始嘅位置啦，同埋你可以揀到嘅升華嗰啲技能啦，例如好似之前講嘅變身啊，變做紅啊嗰類型嘅嘢啦，全部都係一粒技能嚟嘅，並唔係一個升華限定咗先至可以做到嘅嘢嚟嘅。跌咁多嘢嘅，係啊，因為今季嗰個粉啊，今季啲粉啊。佢上咗啲敵人身之後咧，就會加多好多嗰個掉落量啊、掉落稀有度啊嗰堆嘢，所以今季咧，你見到呢一位就死呢隻嘢咁樣啦，佢個名下邊唔係淺藍色嗰個，有個黃色、紫色同埋，等陣啦，我睇下有冇辦法可以再揾翻到佢先。唔係呢隻，唔係呢隻。有個黃色、紫色同埋藍色嗰幾個啦，就係入咗去機制裏邊嗰啲粉嚟嘅，加咗落去啲怪之後咧，就會加多咗佢哋嘅掉落量啦、掉落稀有度啊，同埋跌通貨嘅量嘅。嗱，就好似咁樣咧，你就見到啦，一粒啲啊，所以今季係真係好容易揾錢啊，唔係講笑。但係喺裏邊佢吸得越多粉嘅話咧，就會越癲嘅隻嘢。同一時間咧跌嘅亦都會越癲嘅。咁我隻人就話呢隻嘢我真係打唔死嘅。佢有個 Immortal Core 點打咧？佢又打我唔死，我又打佢唔死。anyways， 繼續。係啊，你過幾日試啦，你過幾日得閒之後再試啦。
Another aspect to this was to the mercenary trailer that I was quite interested in. So again, we don't know how much of it has to do with the general gameplay, but in the
但機睇
Mercenary
要夠
trailer,
慘啱啊
when I mean, people should watch it, but when the Mercenary takes on the boss at the end of the trailer, the pacing of the boss fight is, I believe, he's kind of trying to dodge attacks. He's like debuffing the boss. And then when the boss gets to about like 30, it just dies super quick. And I'm guessing it's because he's stacking up all these debuffs throughout the fight. Is this
反而
something
呢隻
more
冇啲
tailored
頭
towards
先
the
嗰隻就跌
mercenary,
咗
or
啲
is
搞
this
笑。
kind of how you envision combat across the board?
So generally speaking, we like what I guess the feeling I like to try and get is that you've got some kind of
其他
way
嘢
to
櫃
do,
圖
to
釘
do
一啲
really
得
large amounts
250
of damage,
係啊。
but you can't always necessarily perfectly execute that because of what the boss is doing. So in that particular thing, it wasn't actually that there were debuffs on the boss. I just managed to execute a perfect. So the combo I was using there was you use incendiary rapid shot, which builds up like heat on your cross.
下邊呢一度停一停先，因為呢一條問題有啲複雜嘅。佢問點解喺嗰個傭兵示範嗰條片嗰度，臨尾突然間一剎那嗰隻王會俾佢溶咗咧？到底係一樣佢需要練好耐先至知嘅嘢啊，定還是係有啲咩巧妙？因為佢話睇落咧就好似一開頭阿 Jonathan 喺度不停咁樣避隻王，突然間咧有一下就瞬間秒殺咗佢咁滯嘅。Jonathan 就話咧，基本上係因為嗰個 run 咧，佢就係做咗一個 perfect 嘅 execution， 即係佢所練嘅技咧就係 perfect 嘅。咁依家呢一部分咧，Jonathan 咧就會解釋佢點解係 perfect 噶啦。首先啱啱已經講咗嘅咧，就係話佢用咗一招叫 rapid shot 嘅嘢啦，令到佢嗰個槍管下邊嗰支嘢啦，嗰個熱量咧就去到最盡嘅。咁跟住越高熱量咧就會係越痛嘅。跟住然後聽佢繼續噏乜啦。
And then with that, then when you fire a grenade, the grenades get extra fire damage on them based on how much heat there was on the crossbow. And then
咁如果係根據頭先所講嗰個 heat 啦，即係個熱量啦，越高嘅時候咧，佢所抌出嚟嘅炸彈咧就會越痛嘅。咁因為佢已經去到最盡嗰個咧，亦即係最痛嗰一下。廿場平均一場 map 3D 咁多，死啦！瀨嘢啦！
Then you can then use incendiary power shot to detonate those grenades. So I just kind of managed to get all the grenades in the right place and get the like the maximum amount of heat on my crossbow at the time at that exact moment. And that's why I did like a really large amount of damage right at the end there.
係啦，基本上就係因為佢抌咗嗰個炸彈啦，地下又有油啦，跟住再搏埋本身已經係滿咗熱量啦，所以就點解嗰幾下會特別痛咯？顯示出嚟，純粹係你當五星連珠咁樣連好晒，跟住咪痛咯。槍管佢下邊有一個我唔知叫咩，佢嗰個佢有個配件咁樣，其實係腦嚟嘅，但係唔知啊，呢啲科幻嘢唔好咁執着啊！呢啲科幻嘢真係唔好咁執着。
But in order to be able to get that, you need to be able to use rapid shot for enough time without having interruption to build up the heat and that kind of thing. So it's just a matter of kind of getting that sorted out. And I think there also might have been something to do with the baby going on there. I can't remember the exact thing around that, but the bosses can go down very quickly if you know how to execute. And actually, an interesting thing with that is that the first time with the mercenary setup that we had for that trailer that I played the boss, that I killed it. It actually took me 5 minutes. And I said to Mark, hey man, what's up with this boss fight? Like, that's taking way too long. Like, what are we doing here? And he's like, what are you talking about? It takes me like 1 minute at most. Like, you must be terrible. And then I tried it again immediately. And then the next time I played it, it took me 2 minutes without like me really realizing that I had particularly learned anything. So it actually turns out that, it doesn't actually take long to learn the mechanics of the boss. And once you know them, the degree of increase in damage you can deal is so much higher. And that's because once you've learned the mechanics of the boss isn't disrupting you quite as much because you kind of know what to expect. And that allows you to kind of build up those various combos that let you execute large amounts of damage. So Yeah, that's kind of what happened there. And so now, of course, like it's actually another case ahead of that was the blind beast. I was doing this demo with the druid and the blind beast just again and again and again and again. At the beginning, I was taking me like 3, 4, 5 minutes to kill that boss fight, and then by the time that I actually recorded the one that I think went online, it was done in like freaking 30 seconds or something like that. And it's literally just from just playing the boss again and again. So it is sort of impressive how learning the mechanics does actually make you better at the game.
As a follow-up question, since you mentioned
繼續翻頭先佢所講嗰一忽先，佢就話一開頭咧，佢打嗰隻王其實係打咗都好耐嘅，就冇印象中記憶得咁耐啦。但係佢話係5分鐘左右嘅，咁佢又覺得太耐，佢同阿 Mark 啦，即係另外一個製作總監就問：喂，咩事啊？點解搞咁耐啊？呢隻嘢係咪有啲問題啊？跟住阿 Mark 就話唔係，好快就搞得掂噶啦。佢又唔係好順氣咁樣，就即刻走去打第二次。打第二次之後咧，就明顯地快咗好多好多，就已經殺咗隻王啦。基本上咧 POE2 裏邊所有王都係啦，你第一次打佢咧係會需要嘅時間非常之耐，因為你未睇過佢啲招式啊，你唔知道點樣避啊，有少少似你當好似魂系啊，又或者 Elden Ring 嗰類型嘅遊戲咁樣，你要頭嗰幾次理解咗，或者頭嗰幾下攻擊你要理解咗佢做咗啲咩啦，跟住之後你就知道邊啲時間係適合可以打佢，咁每一次你再打佢嘅時候咧，其實就會快好多噶啦。呢一樣嘢咧，亦都要緊記嘅，因為之後佢有另外一個答案咧，同呢一樣嘢係息息相關嘅。
That this idea of figuring out where the DPS windows are and being able to properly execute your combos, resulting in like multiples more damage, is that perhaps something that might be a bit difficult to tune with multiplayer? Like if you had like a 2-player party and you just had a really tanky friend keeping the boss perfectly still, wouldn't that in a sense make it much easier?
It can do, but there are various factors. So a lot of the crowd control type mechanics have things built. So for example, freeze, right? If you freeze a boss, then the next freeze takes longer. That's like a thing that kind of cools off over time. But effectively, like the more party members you have, there's kind of this like the various systems that work sort of like how poise works all respond to that. So that kind of means that someone sitting there stunning the monster is going to, if you've got like multiple people doing that, it's going to get harder to sort of crowd control the boss over time. And then it should sort of come out to be relatively similar once you've reached the steady state, as it were, versus having a single player. Once you take into account the amount of increase in life and all that other sort of stuff. So we kind of have to get that tuned exactly right, which I can't say we've done a huge amount of tuning so far on, honestly, because we still need to do a bunch of work there. But ideally, the intention is kind of get it to the point where it sort of feels a little bit similar. But of course, there has to be room for synergy between between characters, right? And we definitely build that in as well. But it will. Ideally, you're not just going to completely trivialize the boss just because you've got a couple of extra players in your party. It's still intended. I mean, we've always striven for like it's just as good in single player as it is in multiplayer, like making sure the balance of that is there.
All right.
喺呢度，阿輝 hello， 係啊，把聲好翻好多啊，個人都好翻好多啊，講真，差唔多完㗎啦，應該差唔多病好啦。喺呢度咧，佢啱啱所講嘅就係阿 Kripp 問佢嘅問題同阿 Jonathan 所答嘅問題，我覺得有少少出入嘅。我覺得阿 Jonathan 唔係好 get 到佢嘅意思。不過 anyways， 阿 Kripp 就話啦，如果多人模式玩嘅話，你有一個朋友係非常非常之硬淨，可以令到隻王基本上淨係打佢唔會喐嘅。咁係咪變相其實多人模式嗰個優勢就大過單機好多咧？阿 Jonathan 咧佢就誤解咗，以為係第二個角色係專門負責做 CC 嘅，然後就令到隻 boss 企定啦。佢就話啦，如果當隻王係喺多人模式嘅話咧，佢要儲 CC 嗰條 poise bar 啦，即係嗰條雲嗰條 bar 啦，就應該會難過正常一個人都幾多下嘅，因為始終你可以2個人嘅份量去打落去，所以咧就應該會比較難可以做到完全 CC 得到嘅情況嘅。另外咧，佢哋等陣啊，跌咗咩？呢把係啊，另外咧，佢哋亦都係希望咧，同 POE 一樣啦，呢隻 POE2係唔係淨係多人先至適合玩嘅啫，單機同多人咧都一樣可以傳通到冇問題嘅。
Now, this is kind of where I meant to ask the question, but I guess I'll elaborate. I was still really curious what pushes a skill and how much of a role the ascendancies have to do with it. Again, we've seen the druid interpreted in other games where it is very much the class. That is, like, in other games, there's no other shape-shifting class. If you want to play a shapeshifter, you play the druid. Now, in POE2, I imagine the shape-shifting part is a skill gem that other classes can use. So what makes the druid more of a druid? How much does the ascendancy have to do with it? Is it kind of in a way where it's like POE1, where they're just slightly better at it?
So when we're doing ascendancy classes as well, it's another one of those cases where we try to make it so that the ascendancy classes can be relevant for builds even when you wouldn't think so. So what we try to do is, like, you got an ascendancy class. If you look at it and what it's called and what it obviously looks like it should be doing, it is clearly going to be good at doing, what you expect the ascendancy class is going to be doing. But at the same time, we try to sort of word all the stats so that they don't technically require, that you're actually using shapeshift forms, for example. They just happen to be very good at the things that shapeshift forms happen to do, and you sort of look at it that way. But we do want to make it so that absolutely you should be able to play, a shape-shifting duelist or something like that. It can be something that we want to have scope for, even if it isn't necessarily common or the most obvious thing to do. It is something we've always, like to try and make it so you can do that. You know what I mean?
All right.
啱啱 Kripp 人所問嘅問題咧，就係話啦，喺其他遊戲嗰度啦，我哋就見過啦，類似德魯伊嘅角色啦，佢就係專門淨係for變身或者變形用嘅啫，其他 class 就冇得用嘅。咁樣 POE2 裏邊到底有幾大部分係類似一個咁樣嘅情況咧？而且每一個升華到底係真係明顯地比其他升華好好多啦，即係德魯伊變紅就點都會好過 let's say 攞隻決鬥者去變紅㗎啦。定還是係只不過係純粹好似而家 POE1 咁樣，佢做嗰一方面嘅嘢係有少少優勢，但係唔係絕對嘅優勢，即係你非佢不可嗰一種做法。Jonathan 就話啦，喺 POE2 其實同 POE1 呢一方面咧都仲係一致嘅。你想玩嘅話咧，其實你中意用乜嘢角色都冇問題嘅。當然啦，如果你用德魯伊去玩變身嘅話咧，就絕對會係 OK 嘅，即係你始終見到佢成個 theme， 佢成個主題就係為咗變身而設，冇理由嗰一樣嘢佢都做得唔好嘅。咁但係僅止於此咯。如果你想攞隻決鬥者去玩變身嘅話咧，其實都仲係可以做到嘅，但係你可能做嘅嘢就要有少少唔同，或者可能做到嘅嘢就會同德魯伊嗰個冇咁完善或者冇咁好，但係並唔係做唔到，同埋佢哋亦都希望喺設計升華嘅時候有好多嘢係共通嘅，例如之前嗰條片裏邊佢哋講過有一個叫做 armor shred 嘅嘢，喺好多個升華裏邊其實都可以做到 armor shred 嘅嘢嘅，或者喺唔同嘅武器都可以做到呢一樣嘢。咁呢一啲咧都係可以留翻俾玩家自己自行配搭嘅。
So you guys put out the date for the POE2 beta. I believe it's in early June, and this is going to be a pretty big milestone. I kind of wanted to ask a pretty broad and general question, and I have no idea what to expect for a reply because I'm sure there's still a lot of things in the work. But what can people expect out of this beta? Like, are we going to see the whole game up until the point where it's developed, or are we just going to have kind of like a shareware limited act version like we've seen from more recent titles?
So the plan is the whole game, but obviously, we're not necessarily going to have finished everything. I don't think that the entire end game will be there. Like, we're sort of planning probably around like 60 maps as like a sort of starting point for the end game. There will be a couple of other end-game systems in there as well, but I obviously don't really want to talk too much about them right now. We really do need to make sure that it's the whole campaign at the very least, and maps as well, just so that we can actually do progression testing, because if we can't test the whole game, we're kind of not really learning anything on that economic front, and I think that is one of the more important things we can get out of the beta, and making sure that there's nothing too kind of like... I don't know, like nothing that's like breaking the game too hard, because during beta, obviously once you're out of beta, right, like we can never remove items or really, like they have to exist forever at that point, right? So we want to make sure that everything's good there, but making sure that the progression is good and all that stuff really just requires the whole game to kind of be there. So yeah, it won't be like all content, but it will be like not especially not an end game, but it will be a very sizable amount of it. And there might be like a couple of classes that we can't initially do. I'm hoping we can do all of them, but we'll sort of see where we get to with that. But it should be most of them at the very least. And
喺度停一停先，佢再講落去我就記唔到啦。Kripp 問咗一條都幾簡單嘅問題，就係、到底 POE2 嘅 beta 會以乜嘢形式進行？因為喺近期啦，其實就係講緊 D4 啦，佢測試嘅時候咧，就只不過係一部分，係一小部分嘅 game，佢就以 shareware 去形容佢，即係一個軟件啦，你可以同大家分享，但係佢咧就有限嘅內容嘅啫。咁到底 POE2 嗰個封測會係以乜嘢形式去進行嘅咧？我哋可以預計得到，或者我哋可以，或者應該話 Jonathan 可以 confirm 得到有幾多內容喺裏邊，我哋依家係已經可以準確地知道嘅咧。Jonathan 嘅答案咧就話啦，佢咧就會係有晒絕大部分嘅遊戲落去嘅。咁但係咧，所謂絕大部分嘅意思咧，就係因為佢哋即使係推出封測嘅時候都好啦，佢哋應該咧就未係完整成個 POE2 可以整好晒嘅。佢哋亦都會有一啲嘢咧係喺封測推出咗之後咧，先至再加落去。咁呢一個咧就並唔係因為佢哋想 hold 起啲嘢，係純粹因為未製作完咁解嘅啫。咁喺封測裏邊，佢就話可以預計大概會有 end game 啦，有早期啦，基本上就係由章節一路去到 end game 嗰段，全個部分都喺度噶啦。佢話如果一個測試啦，呢一類型嘅測試啦，唔可以由頭玩到落去尾嘅話咧，基本上就冇乜意義嘅。即係佢哋想測試嘅嘢嘅數據又拎唔到，佢哋想知道到底每一個人由一開頭慢慢成長到係後邊係咪平滑嗰個難度係咪 OK 咧？佢哋都好難可以做到一個準確嘅測試，所以咧佢哋就冇意 hold 起任何嘅內容嘅。而 end game 啦，如果我頭先冇聽錯嘅話咧，佢就話暫時可能講緊大概60零張圖嘅，咁遲啲都會再加。而至於邊啲部分係未有嘅部分，或者可能會遲啲喺封測再推出咧，就係佢哋之前講過嘅唔同 POE1 嘅賽季啦，佢哋需要重新整過或者重新去調整過，應該咁講，重新調整過，令到佢更加適合 POE2 嘅環境，先至再推出呢一部分咧。佢哋預計喺 POE2 封測嘅時候咧，就會陸續推出翻啲舊嘅機制嘅。
Yeah, I honestly I should hope that anyone who's in the beta would see it as a game that is like fully. Like has full quality and as big or bigger than any other kind of action RPG title that you would get. 而呢一句咧，亦都係非常之緊要嘅。佢話希望咧喺封測嘅時候咧，佢哋就已經可以完全感受得到 POE2 最後嘅成品係點嘅，即係呢一個係佢哋希望可以做到嘅嘢。同一時間咧，佢哋更加希望嘅咧，就係玩家咧喺試過 POE2 嘅封測啊，講緊就已經可以知道咗 POE2 嗰個內容係多過暫時市面上任何一隻 ARPG 嘅。咁呢一個 claim 咧係幾大膽嘅，但係咧我都幾肯定係真嘅。
Well, that's great. Going through the different places on the internet where people are talking about POE2, the players that don't already play POE1, their main concern has to do with Path of Exile in general as a genre being a bit complex. And with new game releases generally trying to at least touch upon broad appeal. Is there some things that POE2 is tackling differently than POE1 to kind of grab the attention of some prospective players?
So
Kripp 呢條問題咧就係問啦，喺現今嘅大部分 game 啦，其實都係盡量希望遊戲可以複雜，然後簡單化咗佢嘅。POE1 啦，不嬲都係以複雜命名㗎啦，亦都係以複雜為名嘅。到底喺 POE2 裏邊會唔會有呢一方面即係簡單化嘅考量咧？
I think that like this is kind of one of those really complicated ones because it is very important to us that we never dumb the game down to the extent that you won't be able to do all the interesting stuff that we're known for. But at the same time, we do obviously understand the fact that, we're known as a very complicated game. And I think it's sort of interesting because there are certain things about that. Like, so I've actually been talking a lot recently with people on the team about this and like what we can do to kind of improve things. And I think there's kind of a mix of factors. So on the one hand, you've got stuff that we've already kind of like announced that how we're fixing it. Stuff like this, the way the skill system works, I think is just like way better for new players. This kind of thing is just straight up improvement. But I think that there are things like when there was a recent conversation on Reddit as well about the skill tree and what we're doing about it. And I think a lot of people, I think there's a lot of subtlety with it because it's like a lot of people are like, oh, you should just have like free respecs all the time so that it's just easy, and if you make a mistake, it's no problem. This kind of thing. And I kind of look at that and I'm like, I don't know that that's really necessarily going to solve the problem. I think like we've kind of got this issue of like trying to communicate information in a both succinct way so it doesn't kind of scare people off, but also enough information you actually sort of get everything. So I've been looking into ways recently about how we can kind of do that. And I think that this is like a feature that we've just been proposing recently, but kind of haven't actually gone any way towards implementing yet. But we're talking about like making it so that when you go to allocate stats on the passive tree, that it's more clear whether or not the skills that you have equipped would actually be affected by it. Like this kind of thing. Like we've been discussing sort of like, what are the common pitfalls that people are going to run into. But the other thing as well is that we're planning on just doing some straight up usability testing. We've got like, in the future, we've got a usability lab that we're going to be using to kind of like test with completely just like players that are off the street and just kind of see, like how they respond to things, like do they understand things.
好，喺度停一停佢先，因為再講落去咧，我又唔記得㗎啦。頭先 Kripp 嗰條問題啦，就係問會唔會令到隻遊戲可以簡單啲，會唔會有呢一方面嘅考量？阿 Jonathan 咧就話啦，佢哋咧唔希望個遊戲咧會簡單到一個地步，做唔到好多佢哋原本 POE1 出名嘅系統或者多人認識嘅嘢，或者多人中意嘅可能性嘅。呢一樣嘢係佢哋唔希望做到嘅。但係咧喺最近啦，即係其實呢個好似係2個禮拜定唔知3個禮拜之前嘅事嚟㗎啦。佢哋就開始喺度討論緊相關嘅問題，咁樣就希望就得出一個結論啦，就係希望可以令到隻遊戲喺天賦樹裏邊啦，即係例如依家咁樣打開呢個天賦樹啦。咁我依家有一招技係用緊 Earthquake 㗎嘛。我其實喺呢一個位裏邊咧指落去咧，我係完全唔知道究竟邊一啲點係對我有用嘅。咁呢一部分咧就唔係佢啱啱所講嘅，但係喺之後嘅另外一個訪談裏邊講到嘅，就係話喺新嘅 POE 裏邊啦喺 POE2 裏邊啦，佢哋嘅天賦樹咧就會做到啦。例如我指落去，求其揾一點先。例如我指落去呢一點啦，佢下邊咧就會直接話俾我聽啦，呢一點咧係加幾多 DPS 左右嘅。換句話說啦，即係你可以想象成一個類似喺 POE 裏邊嘅 POB， 去即時顯示到底邊一點係有用，邊一點係冇用。佢咧希望透過呢一類型嘅方法啦，就可以令到新玩嘅玩家啦更加容易理解實質上喺天賦樹上邊啦邊一樣嘢係對佢哋有用嘅。而且咧，佢哋亦都有另外一樣打算啦，就係啱啱佢呢一度講嘅最尾嗰一部分啦，佢就話佢哋之後啦係會有一個 usability test 嘅，即係一個可用度嘅測試嘅。呢一種測試咧就係喺街度隨機揾啲人翻嚟，跟住然後咧就可能俾錢佢哋，叫佢哋試下玩 POE， 然後睇下佢哋會唔會理解得到 POE 喺邊啲地方佢哋會卡住咗玩唔到。呢一方面佢哋暫時未做啦，但係喺將來啦。我諗應該都係6月前嘅事啦，佢哋就會積極咁樣去進行呢一類型嘅嘢，然後收集到嘅數據咧，又會再進一步改善，令到玩家特別係新嘅玩家啦，可以有個更容易、更好嘅體驗，而唔係直接將隻遊戲變得簡單化，令到隻 game 失去咗佢本身有嘅特色。另外咧，亦都有一樣嘢咧，就係關於重置嘅天賦點嘅。重置嘅天賦點咧，佢亦都話啦，如果個遊戲係可以喺個天賦樹裏邊已經好清楚咁樣令到你理解得到到底嗰一點對你係有用啊，或者係冇用，或者有啲乜嘢用嘅話咧，其實咧應該咧就可以減輕到一啲新嘅玩家佢哋可能需要到非常之多重點先至可以解決到佢哋之前點錯點嘅呢啲問題。Anyways，我唔知，因為頭先一開頭可能冇人啦，咁樣我唔知道其實嗰個 podcast 嗰度係聽得清唔清楚。如果係太細聲嘅話，你哋話翻俾我聽。 唔該。Anyways， 繼續啦。
So, there's a lot we can do here, and it is going to be a focus, but at the same time, I just don't want people to hear from that the idea that, we're just going to make the game, we're just going to dumb it down, you know what I mean? Like, it is really important that we not do that.
Well, that's good to hear. I was browsing the wiki, because there is a POE2 wiki. It's kind of just a list of information, and I'm sure, again, some of it... not necessarily outdated as far as the public knows, but perhaps you'd like to touch upon the subject because we're bringing it up again. One thing that PoE has gotten some attention for is kind of like the instant logout that's especially used by hardcore players. On the wiki, I found that there is set to be a 2.5-second cast time for opening portals mid-combat. And taking damage will interrupt it?
It is actually just in boss fights. You can do it instantly when you're not in a boss fight. But yes, the idea is to actually prevent you from doing that, right? Like we want you to actually have to actually fight the boss and be able to kill it in one go, ideally. Or maybe that there's a few points in the boss fight where where you would be able to take the opportunity. But the key thing is there's still some skill there. It's not just it isn't just a matter of like go in, go out here, that kind of thing.
So you try to find the window where you can cast your portal to kind of reset your flasks and kind of maybe make a quick change. But if you, my understanding, and I think this was the case for the demo at ExileCon this year, if you die, the boss encounter does reset, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I've also learned again on the wiki. So again, I'm not sure if this is current, but
停咗呢度先。哇，好彩喎！生率冇問題，放心。OK， 唔該晒，好彩玩緊呢個標啫，我可以完全係半隻眼喺度望緊個 game， 基本上都冇乜大問題。耐唔耐死下呢啲好正常。Anyways， 佢頭先咧就話啦，喺 POE2 嘅 wiki 裏邊啦，其實即係 POE wiki.net 裏邊 POE2 嗰一部分啦，佢就見到話開傳送門啦係有一個2秒幾嘅施放速度嘅，佢就有啲擔心到底呢一樣嘢係咪真嘅咧，同埋點解會有呢一個決定嘅咧 ？Jonathan 咧就話啦，呢一個咧係淨係應用於當你打緊王嘅時候先至會有嘅啫。個原意咧就係唔希望一開頭Kripp亦都有提及到嘅就係 lockout macro 呢一樣嘢，即係唔希望玩家去直接去用登出呢一樣嘢去避過咗個王，因為始終啦喺 POE2 裏邊，你每一次離開咗個 boss arena 啦，如果唔係開傳送門嘅話啦，個 boss 咧就會完全重置噶啦。咁呢一個咧，不論係你登出咗令到個遊戲刪咗，或者離開咗嗰個地方啦，又或者係你個角色死亡，所以離開咗嗰個戰場，即係王咧都會完全重置嘅，即係佢嘅血量會完全重置嘅。而呢2點幾秒嘅施放速度咧，就純粹係為咗呢一樣嘢而設。佢哋希望啦，打王嘅時候咧，你係有一段時間你係需要知道幾時你係適合開一個 portal 出去令到你回翻啲 flash， 因為你要記住喺 POE2 裏邊啦，啲白怪啊，好似藍怪都會回 flash 嘅，但係白怪係唔會回 flash 嘅。換句話說啦，如果一隻 boss 佢係本身會召啲小怪出嚟，嗰堆全部都係白怪嚟嘅，嗰堆怪咧純粹係增加咗成個打鬥嘅難度，而唔會幫你回翻藥劑衝啦。咁而嗰 2.5 秒咧，就係希望大家可以知道或者學識幾時去開一個傳送門，跟住可能依家冇藥啦，咁我就可以入翻去，然後咧就翻去個藏身處又好，城鎮都好，回翻滿血，跟住之後再翻入去繼續打佢。
Apparently you can pause during solo play, is that right?
You can. Yep, you can.
Do you see this as potentially being abused by hardcore players, pausing in a moment where they for sure will know they'll die and they'll just wait for like the next patch cycle or hotfix to like reset their character's position?
So you can always log out and reset the boss fight whenever you want, right? Like you're not going to if you alt F4 ultimately that ends the boss fight, right? Because because you can log back in and start from scratch. But the key thing you can't do is just whittle the boss down like one, like log out, go back to town, heal, go back to the boss, and then continue from scratch. You know what I mean? So like it is actually, I mean, maybe okay isn't the word, but it is a thing you can do to alt F4 from a boss fight to prevent your death. And I think that is something that there is really no solution for if it even honestly needs solving. Like it's but because now, but in POE1, the cost wasn't high enough, right? Because like you just go back and continue the boss fight from where you left off. If you you still have to be able to kill the boss in one go, if you know what I mean. In POE2, which was not the case before. So and this actually, by the way, is something that we have to be really careful about, because it means that bosses that are progression blocking can be actually progression blocking, right? Like, like if you can't kill it, you just can't continue the game in some cases, right? If it's an act boss or something like that. So there's people have to get good in some.
喺呢一度啊，阿 Kripp 就問啦，你睇咗我上次條直播，你都會明白嘅，就係喺 POE2 裏邊啦，你可以隨時撳個 escape 掣啦，後邊咧就會係停咗噶啦，係 pause 咗，好似 Ultimatum 咁樣 pause 咗嘅。咁佢就問啦，你擔唔擔心有啲人會咁樣 pause 咗啦？特別係玩 hardcore 嗰啲人咁樣 pause 到個 server 重新開機為止，然後先至再繼續玩，咁樣去避免佢哋 hardcore 嘅角色唔需要死亡。阿 Jonathan 就話咧，其實你依然係可以用 lock out 嘅，只不過你 lock out 咗之後咧，你就需要重置咗成個打鬥咁解嘅啫。所以喺 POE1 裏邊啦，你隨時可以 lock out 嘅原因咧，係因為你 lock out 係冇成本噶嘛，你只不過係消耗咗個 portal， 即係黃又唔會突然間回翻滿血，跟住之後你基本上又唔會嘥咗啲時間，你只不過喺邊一度完結，喺邊一度離開咧，就喺邊度繼續嘅。而 POE2 就唔同啦，你喺邊度離開咧，就會喺翻最開頭嗰度繼續嘅，所以咧，淨係呢一樣嘢咧，就應該會杜絕咗 lock out macro 或者 lock out 呢一樣嘢噶啦。
Cases, but also we have to just be really careful that those progression blocking bosses don't, completely alienate people as well.
With that in mind, I'm actually
而另一樣嘢咧，就係佢臨尾呢一忽所講咧，就係話喺佢哋，因為真係未有成個進度嘅測試啦，其實佢哋都仲未係好肯定究竟啲 boss 會唔會係太難嘅。如果某一啲主線嘅 boss， 例如啦，我哋依家 POE 可能係 Act5 嘅其他法咁先算啦。係啊，例如好似 Act5 嘅其他法咁先算啦。如果我哋打佢嘅時候，呢一隻嘢係太難嘅，而係非常之難先至可以一次過成功嘅話咧，咁就會變成可能好多人都卡咗喺 Act5 呢一度，因為每一次打 boss 都必須要一次性去完結啦，咁樣就令到某一啲過分地難嘅 boss 就會變成一個真係卡關嘅 boss。佢哋咧唔希望呢一樣嘢發生嘅，但係呢一樣嘢咧就要等到佢哋有一個完整嘅進度測試，試下到底去到嗰個位嘅角色係咪真係冇問題咧？咁樣先至可以再作調整嘅。
Something that came to mind is it going to be like a one campaign per character type of thing, or will you be able to like have multiple characters to kind of help with the bosses along to kind of alleviate the progression?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean about that. But I mean, you will have to complete the campaign on each character.
Okay.
But you can always like, I mean, just like in POE1, right? Like there's things you can do to rush another character through, like quickly if you
right. No, I was thinking like if you had a character that really wasn't good at all against a certain boss, could you get your other character to kill it for that
I see what you mean. No. So yeah, it doesn't work like that. It basically works like POE1 in this regard.
Okay.
Yeah.
呢一條就係一個非常之簡單嘅問題嚟嘅啫。阿 Kripp 咧就問到底，如果我 let's say 呢隻人真係好廢咁先算啦，我可唔可以用我第二個，例如用翻我原本嗰隻角色去幫佢清咗呢一關，跟住然後等我可以繼續過到個章節，定還是係必須要嗰一隻角色去見證到嗰個章節嘅王或者嗰啲王死亡先至可以繼續前進，或者係咯前進咯。跟住阿 Jonathan 就話啦，佢基本上同 POE1 係一模一樣嘅，你個角色咧都一定要係在場啦，先至可以，即係話啦，你唔可以去到let's say我而家打呢隻王咁先算啦，轉個角色入嚟，跟住然後打完佢之後咧，轉翻原本嗰隻角色就完成咗嗰個進度，就可以繼續前進啦，就冇呢支歌仔唱嘅。
Although interestingly, no, actually, scratch that. I was about to say something. I realized we haven't announced it yet.
Okay. So I have maybe a difficult question for you, but around the time we got Ruthless, we started hearing some of the news for POE2, and a lot of it kind of matched up. And we'll talk about the crafting bench and all that being removed, just kind of similar features in a way. Ruthless in POE1 has seen kind of like lukewarm popularity. Personally, I really like it. I think it's maybe a touch more ruthless than I would like, but I mean, like I'm playing non-ruthless this league, and so far this league I've found about 30,000 alteration orbs to where I don't even bother using an augmentation orb because it takes too much time to click it back and forth, right? So obviously the answer is somewhere in between the two. But
I agree.
How are you designing the kind of the pacing of the game? And
喺度咧就講一講佢到底問緊啲咩，同埋要 fill in 翻少少 background 俾大家。Kripp 啦，如果你唔知嘅話啦，基本上就係其中一個最大嘅 ruthless POE player 或者 ruthless 嘅 content creator 嚟嘅。喺除咗呢一季之外啦，佢過去嗰年幾基本上就係自 ruthless 出咗之後啦，佢都係玩 ruthless 嘅啫。對佢嚟講啦，覺得 POE1 嘅 ruthless 咧就有啲太過 ruthless 嘅，依然係咁樣。但係就喺佢哋講 POE1 會有 ruthless 模式嘅時候啦，其實就係差唔多同 POE2 推出嘅，應該係差唔多同 POE2 公佈嘅時候差唔多嘅。佢係咁講啦，實質上唔係嘅，一個係 3.9， 一個係 3.15 嘅事嚟嘅，嗰度係隔咗年幾嘅啦。But anyways。咁佢就問啦，咁喺 POE2 裏邊，我哋都見到好多 ruthless 嘅影子啦，又或者調翻轉啦，喺 ruthless 裏邊，我哋見到好多 POE2 嘅影子。例如翻到城要撳一樣嘢啦，喺 ruthless 就要同個 NPC 講嘢啦，喺 POE2 就要撳個井去回復你嘅藥劑充能啊，去回復你嘅生命啊等等嗰啲嘢。咁樣到底 POE2 啊 ruthless 啊呢一類型嘅嘢，佢哋係諗住點樣發展呢？
The abundance of currencies and items and all that. What has the goal changed? Seeing ruthless not like explode in popularity, I guess is my question.
So there's
咁佢話佢今季冇玩 ruthless 嘅時候咧，佢就基本上咧就已經執咗3萬個呢個改造石 alternation 嘅啦。呢一樣嘢咧，同喺 ruthless 嚟講咧就差啲共地嘅。咁到底係自出咗 ruthless 之後，因為嗰個普及程度唔係咁高，所以就改變咗佢哋嘅方向啊？定還是係點樣咧？係啦，基本上就係咁樣嘅一條問題啦。
There's a lot to talk about here, like a lot. I guess the first thing with Ruthless is I think Ruthless did definitely go too far. And more to the point, I actually think Ruthless bundled in too many things in one go. I think if Ruthless had just been item drop changes and hadn't done a lot of other things that Ruthless did, like, for example, crafting bench removal and the movement skill stuff and like a bunch of other stuff, I think it actually would have gone down a lot better. And I also think as well that there probably wasn't enough attention paid to map sustain and a few other details like that. Like in particular, I think one of the major philosophical things we did learn from Ruthless is that we need to make sure not to reduce the access to content being a big thing. Like I think that Ruthless did make it too hard to get access to content.
Jonathan 覺得啦 ，Ruthless 呢一樣嘢啦，其實就問題咧都有幾多下嘅。其中一個咧就係喺一次過裏邊，佢哋嘗試做太多嘢啦，又整走嗰個位移技啊，又減低咗掉落啊，又將其他嗰堆嘢啦，總之太多嘢係同一時間推出啦，所以咧就令到 Ruthless 嗰個效果咧唔係咁理想嘅。特別係啦，佢啱啱所講到最後呢一部分就係話，佢喺 Ruthless 裏邊咧，佢哋限制咗玩家可以玩到唔同嘅 content， 限制得太多啦。講緊嘅 content 咧，即係 Alice Passive 裏邊呢一紮嘢。如果你想可能打一個 Breach Lord 嘅話咧，你基本上可能儲成世咧，你就可以成個 server 揾到一隻 Breach Lord， 冇咁誇張嘅。但係基本上都係講緊好長嘅時間。咁當然啦，喺 ExileCon 之前，有人成功試過喺個零月啊，好似個半月定唔知一個月裏邊，將所有 Uber 王唔係，好似係 Uber 紅藍王兩隻都通咗嘅。然後咧就贏咗嗰一次嘅打王比賽嘅。但係嗰一次啦，亦都係 Crucible League 裏邊有一個非常之 OP 嘅爆炸圖騰，所以先至可以叫做成事嘅啫。咁佢咧就覺得咧喺 Ruthless 裏邊咧限制咗咁多呢啲內容啦，係其中一個最大嘅弊處嚟嘅。
And also, like, probably the currency was a bit too rare. There's like various things about that.
係啊，通貨亦都太過罕有。
But also, and I'd love to fix those in Ruthless, honestly, but the problem with that is that whenever we say, hey, we're doing a bunch of Ruthless stuff to improve it, we just kind of get a lot of, why are you working on Ruthless? You know what I mean? Like, so I don't think that, like, the ship has kind of sailed there, unfortunately, which is a bit of a shame, which isn't to say we won't ever address it, but I think we at least learned a lot from Ruthless to help there. So, I mean, I guess that's one side of things, but the next side of things, I guess, just comes into all of the general philosophy of how item drops should be should be done in POE2. And I think everyone can agree that we definitely need to fix the fact that the amount of shit on the screen is so high. That, I mean, like, okay, so random thing. Mark was decided that what he was going to do this league in POE1 was play the like ultra ridiculous item finding strategies. You know, he's never actually done the like full on crazy strategies before.
喺度睇一停先。佢就喺 Ruthless 裏邊啦，其實有好多嘢都有問題啦。頭先佢都已經其實都提及咗唔少噶啦。咁而最大嘅問題咧，就係每一次佢哋想喺 Ruthless 裏邊作出任何改動嘅時候咧，成個玩家嘅群體咧都會好一致咁樣咧，就喺度質疑，點解你又搞 Ruthless 啊？做乜嘥啲時間落去殘暴模式嗰度咧？所以咧，基本上咧，殘暴模式咧要改善咧，都唔係話佢想改善就改善嘅。換句話說啦，唔會點樣再變好，或者唔會再點樣肯再花特別多嘅時間落去改善殘暴模式噶啦。咁呢一樣嘢咧，佢自己啦，又或者我啦，都覺得好可惜嘅。但係無可奈何啦，咁個社群決定咗呢一樣嘢係一個唔可以接受嘅嘢嚟嘅。咁佢哋都必須要遵從翻佢哋玩家嘅意見，就係咁咯，基本上。然後咧就講另一樣嘢啦，即係 Ruthless 雖然係去到一個 extreme 啦，即係跌裝或者跌自己度跌得太少啦，但係喺一般情況之下，喺 POE 裏邊啦，其實跌嘅實在太多啦，甚至乎第二個製作總監啦，阿 Mark 佢今季咧就選擇玩打寶，大家都明㗎啦，今季玩打寶好正常嘅啫。喺一個畫面裏邊會跌嘅咧係多到咧根本係黐咗線嘅。Anyways， 繼續。
And one of the things he ran into was the fact that when you have you get to a certain point, you can't even press Alt anymore because the game client will take so long to have all of the pop-ups appear on screen.
呢一度就係話撳個 O 掣，基本上就會令到隻 game hang 機。
So that's not so good. There's definitely some problems there. So yeah, that's obviously the other side of the extreme. But I guess I'm interested to actually hear your question about this, because this was an interesting one. Is what do you think should be the difference in amount of value that, say, an average, like let's say 50th percentile player gets versus a 99th percentile player? Like, I'm interested to hear what kind of multiplier you believe is good.
呢一部分咧，我暫時停一停打機先，因為呢一部分咧係需要專心聽嘅，而且咧係需要專心解釋嘅。呢一個問題係幾特別嘅，就係好似頭先佢話齋啦，喺依家嘅 POE1 裏邊，其實跌嘅嘢咧就係過多，多到咧你有陣時撳個 alternate 掣啦、ALT 掣啦，佢就會直頭 hang 機，因為太多嘢佢要顯示翻出嚟啦。咁佢就好想知道Kripp 佢嘅意見，覺得一個大概係喺成個尺度裏邊中位嘅玩家同最頂尖嘅玩家，佢哋嘅掉落量或者掉落物品係應該相差幾遠嘅。
It's really tough. I don't know. I quite like the ruthless economy. I quite like it because everything has significance, and everything has significance.
Kripp 就話覺得呢條問題真係唔知點樣答嘅，有啲難嘅。但係咧，佢咧係好中意、好嚮往 Ruthless 殘暴模式裏邊嗰個經濟嘅，因為所有嘢咧，不論大與小啦，都係有一個價值，而且嗰個價值咧係可以長存咗都好多個禮拜，直到可能季尾嗰陣時先至開始跌價，冇失去咗佢嗰個意義
嘅。After playing Ruthless quite a lot for like 2-3 weeks, I start to have an overabundance of transmutation orbs.
喺呢一度咧，佢就舉咗一個例子，玩咗得認真咁樣玩 Ruthless， 玩咗可能講緊2-3個禮拜， 脱變石 orb of transmutation 終於會變得係非常之多，可以有多咗出嚟泛濫咗嘅 transmutation。但係如果係講緊一般嘅 POE1 嘅話，你過完 Act 嘅時候你就已經 transmutation 泛濫咗㗎啦。但今季真係成功放慢咗玩家節奏，打硬怪有高回報 ，GGG 應該樂見。GGG 今季唔樂見嗰個掉落數量㗎，阿寶物一間佢亦都會解釋。
Right? So that's when they start losing their value. I feel that's honestly a good point to be at. You know, when a currency that's fairly regularly dropping becomes worthless, being like 2 weeks for a hardcore player in. Just everything kind of mattering is one of the really big appeals for Ruthless for me.
喺玩咗2-3個禮拜之後啦，一啲最常見嘅嘢先至開始失去嘅價值啦，就係阿 Kripp 佢覺得殘暴模式最正嘅地方，因為所有嘢咧都係變到有非常之大嘅意義，再唔係好似平時玩 POE 咁樣，好多嘢喺好短時間之內你係完全唔起眼，甚至乎你嘅 filter 裏邊亦都唔會再出現佢嘅。佢覺得咧呢一個或者呢一種節奏啦，呢一種掉落嘅節奏啦，係佢個人嚟講比較中意嘅。
I feel like the conversation of the average player versus, you know, the top 1% player kind of gets lost in trade league because people are really good at manipulating the economy or people are really good to play in parties efficiently.
佢覺得喺交易模式裏邊啦，基本上如果你係講緊最頂尖同埋中位數嘅話咧，最頂尖嗰邊咧實在差得太遠啦，因為最頂尖嗰班人咧係非常之識得操縱市場啦，又或者識得點樣去利用呢一個經濟嘅，咁所以咧嗰個差其實太大，佢覺得好難咧可以咁樣去做一個衡量嘅。
Where that model gets completely destroyed. So I really hesitate to give an answer in numbers there.
亦都係因為交易嘅原因啦，所以佢就唔係咁想俾一個佢心目中覺得應該嗰個差企嘅距離出嚟，因為咧實質上咧係真係可以太大嘅。
I think you still need to have a reasonably large disparity between like average like 50th percentile and 99th percentile because that's kind of the thing that you're striving for a lot of the time is increasing your drop rate.
阿 Jonathan 咧，佢就覺得啦，始終咧，即使係因為有 trade 嘅原因啊等等嘅原因都好啦，佢覺得一個喺一般嘅玩家，即係中位50% 左右嘅玩家咧，同一個最頂尖99% 左右嘅玩家咧，係應該有一個非常之大嘅差距嘅。嗰個起碼喺嗰個回報上邊，一定要有一個鮮明嘅分別，咁樣咧先至可以吸引到啲人去繼續改善自己，繼續令到自己去玩得更好呢一隻遊戲，去一路玩呢一隻遊戲嘅。
And so I actually think that one of the issues is, so then the other question is, alongside this, to kind of, let's establish some constants here, right? So I would say, and this may seem like a high number, but I think that you need a difference of 1,000 times between the best player and the average player.
阿 Jonathan 就話啦，佢繼續再講落去咧就會有啲難嘅，所以咧就喺度先俾咗一個數值出嚟先。佢覺得最頂尖嘅玩家同一個一般嘅玩家，講緊係即係所有玩家裏邊大概50% 嗰個位置嘅嗰一班玩家，佢哋揾到嘅分別咧應該係有1000倍嘅。
Of amount of wealth acquisition. So that isn't to say number of items, I'm saying like value of the stuff that you'll get.
呢一個1000倍咧，就係講緊佢可以揾到嘅裝備嘅價值，而唔係揾到1000倍嘅數量，即係唔係代表一個50% 一般嘅玩家咧，就係揾到1粒 C 嘅，然後一個最頂尖嘅玩家咧喺同一時間裏邊應該揾到1000粒 C， 唔係咁樣樣1對1嘅兌換，而係可能一個一般嘅玩家喺呢一個時間佢可能係揾到1粒 D， 但係可能喺個頂尖玩家佢揾到一啲價值差唔多成1000個 D 嘅裝備，呢一個咧就係佢嗰個分別。
And that's so that you've got something to strive for, right? Like you need that level of like of disparity from the bottom to the top, to kind of make it actually like to actually give some form of feeling of like I'm getting better at this game, I'm improving, you know what I'm doing. So
亦都係因為有呢一個咁鮮明嘅分別啦，先至可以令到玩家由50% 一路向上爬嘅時候，越嚟越接近最頂尖嘅玩家嘅時候，不斷可以感覺到自己 所做嘅嘢係有所提升，而且個回報咧亦都係有所明顯嘅，有明顯嘅回報嘅。
I don't know if does that number seem high or low to you? Like, what do you reckon? How does that feel to you?
It's, if you're considering the trading prowess of market geniuses, then it doesn't seem high.
Jonathan 就問阿 Kripp 啦，咁你覺得到底啱啱我所講嘅呢1000倍嘅分別，到底算係高啊，定係唔高咧？如果阿 Kripp 就話啦，如果係計埋係可以利用呢一個經濟，即係可以交易嘅話咧，1000倍咧就絕對唔係一個高嘅數字嚟嘅。
If we're talking about efficient play with stacking the right mechanics and multipliers, that does seem very high.
但係如果純粹係單純以大家都係刷圖嘅角度嚟睇，唔做任何交易，只不過係可能最頂尖嘅玩家知道應該用乜嘢機制同其他乜嘢機制配搭啊，又或者佢身上嘅裝備點樣去可能加多啲 MF 啊，令到成件事運行起上嚟更加有效率。1000倍咧聽上去咧就好似非常之大嘅。
So I just don't know what we're talking about exactly.
Sure. I think we're just talking about let's just say let's say from a map that you're running when you're as I said you're an average player running a map versus the absolute max mega juiced crazy map. You know what I mean? Like in terms of the amount of wealth coming from it. And so
Jonathan 就話啦，你唔係好清楚到底條線喺邊度講咧，係好正常嘅。佢就話啦，我哋以一般嘅人嚟講咧，就係可能你純粹係就咁普通打下圖呢一種就係叫做一般，而去到最頂尖嗰班咧就係 Mega Juice， 即係可能6分儀洗好晒啊，跟住之後開咗尖網啊，開咗其他嘅嘢，可能上晒粉啊，甚至乎係連嗰個預圖天賦都設定好晒，總之整好晒一個係最頂尖嘅打法啦。呢一個咧就係佢所講過1000倍嘅分別。
That may seem high, but actually I think you do need those kinds of numbers to achieve that. So then the next question is, okay, well
咁樣如果純粹單純係以數字上邊去諗一個1000倍咧，聽上去一定係會覺得好高嘅。但係咧就到咗佢下一部分依家要講嘅嘢啦。
How many more items can you actually drop on the ground from one to the other to actually feel reasonable? And I think that number's kind of not really more than 2x. 喺呢一度咧，佢就話啦，咁我哋依家假設1000倍係一個理所當然、一個正常、一個適合嘅倍數，即係由一個乜都冇做就咁入去打一張圖，同一個 Mega Juice 係相差咗1000倍，係一個正常嘅數字啦。咁但係實質上，如果淨係單論掉落物嘅數量，即係可能掉落幾多件裝啊呢一樣嘢嘅話，實質上你會覺得幾多先至係一個正常嘅數字，或者一個正常嘅數位咧？對於 Jonathan 佢本人嚟講啦，佢覺得由一個乜都冇做嘅，同一個乜都做齊嘅人，佢覺得應該係唔會超過2倍掉落嘅嘢，呢一個係正常嘅位。咁但係如果淨係可以掉落2倍嘅話，咁樣又點樣可以拉到一個1000倍嘅分別咧？就係佢一間會講嘅嘢。Like maybe it's a little bit more than that, but the thing is, like on the actual ground, you probably don't want to see more than double the number of items from one to the other, and yet you need to feed and you need to actually be receiving 1,000 times the value. 咁呢一部分咧，佢就話啦，因為你實質上咧唔會想喺地下上邊係有超多嘢嘅，多到根本上就好似一開頭 Mark 嗰個例子咁樣，撳個 turn 掣，你隻 game 就 hang 機噶啦，因為根本冇辦法可以讀到咁多嘢出嚟。而1倍又或者可能勉強多過1倍少少嘅啦，係一個幾正常嘅份量，係一個幾合適嘅份量嚟嘅。咁但係點樣可以令到佢由2倍或者2倍幾變咗做每一樣嘢嘅價值都可以變咗做感覺上係去到成1000倍嘅分別咧？ So if we kind of break that down, I mean, like, so there's a few things that go into this. So one question is, and this sort of matters, is that efficiency of your build comes into it. Like, how fast can you do a map? Because that does come into the kind of like 1,000 number. So
首先第一個數字咧，就係同你個角色係有幾個效率去做完呢一張 map 有關嘅。第一個比喻咧就係，例如你嗰個角色可以1分鐘裏邊就可以清咗呢一幅圖，同另外一般嘅玩家可能需要用到3到5分鐘先可以清完一張圖。咁嗰度咧其實就已經有一個明顯嘅分別，而且咧呢一部分嗰個分別咧亦都係喺佢1000倍嗰個計算之內嘅。
Like if for example, the difference between an average player and a 1% player is like 10x in like speed of playing a map. So like so if a bad player can do a map in 20 minutes and it takes a good player 2 minutes, for example.
哇，好有針對性呢一個。佢一個差嘅玩家咧，可能就需要用到20分鐘去清一張圖；一個好嘅玩家咧，可能就快佢10倍，2分鐘就清完一張圖。咁樣計嘅話
，to do. Then you've already kind of divided that by 10, which means that the actual items on the ground have to be 100 times more valuable per map. And I think
喺呢一度除咗10之後咧，咁樣亦即係話咧，你每一張圖裏邊所掉落嘅物品咧，就由原本嘅1000倍爭咁遠啦，依家就變咗做可能每一件裝係要比原本嗰個價值多100倍左右咧，你就已經可以揾到嗰個效益，揾到個1000倍嘅分別嘅效益出嚟啦。
I think that probably sounds like something that seems within the realm of reasonableness, I would hope.
I see.
Yep.
Okay.
But then the next thing as well is that if the amount of items on the actual ground per monster you kill is only 2x higher, then that means you've got like you have to be able to have increase of rarity be worth 50 times, right? So basically you have to be able to increase the value of items on the ground by 50 times by just like rarity bonuses alone, and it needs to.
而如果用翻頭先嗰個，你已經快過人哋10倍去打圖嘅話，咁樣再加埋一開頭所講每一個正常嘅圖同一個最 juice 嘅圖相差大概講緊2倍嘅裝備嘅話，亦即係話每一件裝備就由頭先嘅100倍變咗做每一件裝備價值係大概貴50倍左右啦，就已經可以達到得到佢一開頭所講嘅1000倍嘅差距。
feel 50 times more as well. It's not enough to just be like, in theory, I kind of know that this is more valuable. It has to really feel like you're getting 50 times more wealth.
Well, I actually had a question later on about Magic Find in
呢一部分咧，基本上就完咗㗎啦，就係話你即係總結一下啦，就係話佢覺得一個正常嘅人同一個最勁嘅人，佢哋揾咧就應該有1000倍嘅分別，但係嗰1000倍咧就可以嚟自於你打圖嘅速度啦，每一張圖佢會跌落嘅數量啦，佢就覺得應該大概係2倍左右。喺呢兩樣嘢之後計完之後咧，就代表每一件裝備嘅價值咧，就需要係大概50倍左右。咁呢一個咧，可能就係個物品稀有度去令到呢一樣嘢可以發生得到嘅。而阿輝冇錯，20張圖20分鐘一張圖係差，的確係鬧緊我嘅，我覺得。But anyways 呢個唔係重點。然後咧 ，Kripp 咧就想問一個關於 Magic Find MF 有關嘅問題。
POE2. Now, if I had to ask this question a month ago, I would basically say, yeah, the rarity quantity system works out pretty well. But I don't know if you've played much this league, but the wisps that you can generate, and you can generate a lot of them, have their own effective quantity and rarity multipliers. And it's maybe one of the first times we've seen such large rarity multipliers with such large quantity multipliers. And it does actually seem a little problematic with the amount of
I agree.
Kripp 就話啦，原本咧就有一條同 MF 有關嘅問題，就諗住稍後先問嘅。咁但係都既然講到嚟 MF 咧，就不如依家問啦。佢就問阿 Jonathan 唔知道你有冇留意到今季呢啲 whips 啊，呢一個機制裏邊呢啲妖精啊，可以疊埋有呢一個稀有度啦，亦都可以疊埋有呢一個數量嘅。以往咧係未試過有一個咁大嘅疊乘數嘅，今次係第一次嘅。佢覺得咧就有些少問題嘅，咁就問阿 Jonathan 意下如何？阿 Jonathan 咧都話其實佢都覺得係有啲問題嘅。
So what kind of systems may we expect with Magic Find in POE2?
Yeah, so what I think that we need to do is that the way that rarity works in POE1, one of the issues with it is it saturates quickly, and also currency is not part of it, and also there's no kind of understanding of there's various other factors of value. So I don't want to go too much into the exact details of this, but effectively what we have to make sure of is that we have the ability to scale value of things on the ground with a single number, and for that to work for all types of items that monsters can drop in a good way, so that you actually feel like you're getting more. We don't just sort of saturate into uniques. I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but effectively you can get rarity to the point where no white items drop and only blue items drop, and then you can go from there so that only rares drop, and then you can go from there so that only uniques drop. Like that's possible, and with the way that POE1's rarity system works.
阿 Jonathan 啱啱所講嗰一忽咧，就話因為喺 POE 一裏邊咧，其實嗰個 system 咧就係基本上咧 Magic Find 嗰一樣嘢咧就唔包括 currency 在內嘅。咁呢樣嘢我諗大家都應該有個譜嘅，或者大家都大概估到嘅。咁所以咧就變相咧喺好多時候佢哋整嗰啲嘢咧都係就咁，淨係得一兩個數值咧先至可以改得到掉落嘅嘢。喺 POE 一嗰個系統裏邊啦，甚至乎你如果將 Magic Find 提升到去一個點嘅時候咧，可以令到成個地圖上邊係唔會再有任何一件白裝出現嘅。如是者啦，你亦都可以將呢一個物品稀有度啦一路推到去極致啦，令到地面上邊係唔會存在任何一件非傳奇嘅裝備嘅。
But we need to sort of change this so that it works better, so that you can actually get higher values of rarity without kind of making it so that you kind of get the saturation. And the reason why kind of more quantity is necessary in POE1 is because more rarity, if we changed all sources of quantity to be rarity in POE1, everything would just be unique and you wouldn't get any more currency, and it kind of wouldn't be like, that's not value in the right way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So effectively we need to improve the way the item drops work in order to make it so that, yeah, as I said, the goal would be you get like a ridiculous amount of juice, you see twice as many items on the ground, but you feel like you're getting, but each item is on average 50 times more valuable than if you didn't do that. And then since you're 10 times faster at playing the game than other people, the end result of that is 1,000 times more wealth acquisition, if you know what I mean. So that's kind of my view on sort of how this would work, and we basically just have to get to the point where that can be the case.
啱啱就話，如果喺 POE 一裏邊啦，如果你搭得呢一個稀有度太高嘅話，甚至乎連通貨都唔會掉落。咁唔係好清楚呢一個嘅意思係咩嘢？即係稀有度係會影響通貨掉落率，定係咩咧？但係咧，佢話即係希望頭先一開頭講嗰個就係快10倍速度，跟住然後每一件裝備每一個 map 跌多1倍嘅裝備，即係2倍嘅裝備。然後咧每一件裝備咧，亦都係價值大概50倍咁多嘅話咧，就可以將兩邊嘅玩家咧嗰個差距拉到大概成1000倍嘅。
So yeah, we have a lot of changes in mind already. I don't necessarily want to talk about the exact specifics of all of them, but that's my thinking at least around how it should be on a high level, if you know what I mean.
I saw a number of people asking in chat when you were talking. I think a lot of people are wondering if the find more stuff part of the game is going to be a stat on your gear. I think that's something people are quite curious about.
Whether or not there's magic find. Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to have magic find still in the game as a thing you can get.
Okay. And you're basically sacrificing character power for it, like you.
呢條問題好簡單嘅，就係問到底 POE2 裏邊仲會唔會有一個類似 Magic Find 或者揾多啲嘢嘅數值喺度？即係因為頭先佢所講嘅就好似講到 Magic Find 基本上係唔會喺 POE2 裏邊存在。咁Jonathan啱啱只不過 confirm 翻係會依然有一個類似 Magic Find 嘅嘢。咁佢嗰個理念咧就係啱啱所講嘅嗰個每一件裝要somehow跌個價值50倍左右嘅呢一個方向，但係至於詳細嘅情況咧，佢就覺得唔係好想依家喺度公佈，亦都唔係好想透露，因為我諗佢哋係未完全諗清楚到底要點樣去改善，暫時只不過係一個理念嘅階段。
Do in POE1.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
That should work basically the same way.
Okay. So I was going to ask about the crafting bench being removed, but you mentioned recently to a Reddit reply that it's no longer going to be removed. And I kind of maybe wanted to ask more of a broad question. One part about Path of Exile 1 I really like is knowing that I can kind of guarantee some kind of big parts to making a character when like a new league starts. And in one end, it can be something like knowing that I can have access to a trigger craft on like a wand for a character like that. And in other cases, it can be like, while I might not be able to find a tier 0 unique, but for example, divination cards kind of offer this fragmented consistency of slowly knowing that you'll eventually get this one item. So is there going to be an element of that in POE2? And maybe you can, I know some of the details are still getting worked out, but maybe some of your goals for the crafting bench if you have set your mind.
Yeah, so the crafting bench absolutely needs to exist for exactly this reason. You should be able to at least get some certainty, if you know what you're doing, of being able to fix issues with your build. You know.
首先咧，呢一條問題就係問到底點解唔係到底點解之前佢哋好似講到話冇咗 crafting bench 啊，跟住之後 Jonathan 又喺 Reddit 度話並唔係嘅 ，POE2 係有 crafting bench 嘅。因為咧對佢嚟講咧 crafting bench 係一個非常之重要嘅部分，可以好肯定啦。每一次開季嘅時候，佢都會知道可能一定會有得可以喺支杖上邊 craft 一個會幫佢觸發某一招技能嘅工藝上去，令到佢可以確保咗某一啲嘢咧係永遠都會存在嘅。阿 Jonathan 佢亦都認同 crafting bench 亦都係因為呢一個原因啦，所以必須要喺 POE2 裏邊保留。即係話啦，有一啲嘢咧係必須要大家都可以確保到佢喺開季嘅時候有一個明確嘅嘢係一定可以使用嘅，而唔係全部都係睇運嘅。
Even if you don't find you don't get lucky, you still are able to do something about that. So I think that's really important. So I think the crafting bench is good for that, and we do have a plan for what we're going to be doing to sort of make that work. As for divination cards, it's sort of interesting because divination cards, like, I really like them in theory. I really do. And in SSF, I think they work really well. But the problem with target farming is that you effectively, when you have an economy, effectively what you're always going to target farm is whatever has the most value in the economy, even if that's not the thing you actually want for yourself. You're just going to be like, okay, here's the thing that's going to have the most trade value, like per hour played on average. So therefore, I just play that. So I think that the way that that works in POE1 with div cards is not so great. It sort of means that the people who, at least the people who want to get the most economic value, just end up farming one map forever and ever and ever.
Crimson Prison Gang is.
而至於命運卡嗰方面啦，佢亦都問到啦，佢話覺得呢一個係一個唔錯嘅去特定 target farm 一樣嘢，去揾一樣嘢出嚟嘅方式嚟嘅。阿 Jonathan 就話佢係中意 definition card 喺 POE1 裏邊，但係淨係僅止於喺 SSF 嘅情況之下，令到玩家啦可以有一個明確嘅目標去 target 某一種傳奇裝備或者某一樣嘢出嚟嘅。但係咧喺一個有經濟嘅環境之下啦，即係一般模式裏邊啦，呢一樣嘢咧就唔係咁可行嘅，因為 end up 咧就係每個人啦都只會點解我個預圖係咁嘅咧？依家先發現完成咗104，但係點解會有迷霧喺度嘅咧？咁奇怪 ，anyways， 總之就係變咗做每一個人可能都淨係揾經濟效益最高嘅嗰一個地圖去不停咁樣重刷，就令到大家都淨係想刷一樣嘢，因為嗰一樣嘢係經濟效益最好嘅，而唔係因為佢哋實質上係中意刷嗰一張圖。
That's what they're called, apparently.
Yeah. So that's a problem. So I don't have an immediate solution to that. There's been various solutions proposed, basically changing the way that div cards work. I think, as I said, and I think in SSF, it's cool. I like it. We need to do something different, I think, here. There'll be some discussion about that. But I do think div cards are cool. I'd like to see them come back in POE2.
就正如頭先所講啦，佢哋內部咧依然係需要再進行討論，先至知道到底 div card 喺 POE2 裏邊何去何從嘅。因為佢自己咧係中意 div card，但係只不過係佢引申出嚟嘅嘢啦，又或者佢導致到玩家嘅動向咧，就唔係佢咁欣賞嘅嘢嚟嘅。咁實質上係點咧，就需要有待討論之後得到個結案啦。得到個結論啦，先至再決定。暫時佢哋內部咧已經提出過好多個唔同嘅方向，但係未有一個佢係最滿意嘅，我覺得。
We'll find a way, I suspect, to make that happen. But I don't know if they're necessarily going to work exactly the same mechanically as they do now.
Okay. I've been scouring the internet for all the POE2 news, and that's included all your recent POE2 interviews. And there was an interview you did at PAX West where you were asked what league mechanics are going to be ported over, at least roughly, from POE1 into POE2. And your answer was it kind of almost depends on which league mechanics you like. And it killed me that there was no follow-up question. So what POE1 league mechanics do you like?
Okay, well, I am a big fan of Delve.
Okay.
And Incursion. Those are two of my favorites, partly because I just enjoyed development of them. Like, they were just really cool and thematic. I really enjoyed them. But I mean, there's lots of other mechanics that are just...
喺度咧 ，Kripp 問咗一個幾搞笑嘅問題。佢話喺 PAX 好似係冇記錯係 PAX 喺 PAX 嗰度就曾經有講過，有冇人問過到底 POE1 邊一啲舊嘅機制會翻去 POE2 嗰度咧，或者 POE2 裏邊再次出現咧？當時咧佢俾嗰個答案咧就係唔清唔楚嘅，而個感覺上咧就似乎係關乎於到底阿 Jonathan 自己本人中意啲乜嘢 mechanic 咧，咁嗰啲咧就好大機會啦，會喺 POE2 裏邊出現啦。但係咧 Kripp 咧就覺得好可惜啦，就點解一路都冇人再追問一條好緊要嘅問題？到底阿 Jonathan 你本人中意玩乜嘢機制嘅？咁樣因為知道咗呢個答案嘅話咧，我哋就知道到底 POE2 應該會有啲咩機制啊。咁啊 Jonathan 咧就俾咗一個幾簡單嘅答案，就係話佢中意 Delve 啦，亦都中意 Incursion 啦，主要係佢嗰個主題上面比較特別啦，而且佢自己亦都有份參與去製作呢兩個機制嘅。
just hugely, that are very popular with players. There's like Ultimatum and things like that. These are great. I mean, I love Ultimatum too, but like there are certain crowd favorites for sure. Incursion. Sorry, I already said that one. Let me think about other ones. What are my favorites in there?
They don't have to be in POE2. This is a non-commit
fair
answer here.
I'm just trying to think of like what are my other favorite ones. I mean, Breach, obviously. Breach was one of the earliest leagues that I really felt there was just something really, like I feel like, because what was before Breach? There wasn't really that many good ones before
Legion,
right?
I think, was before Breach.
Was Legion before Breach?
Yes.
Surely not. Surely not. Am I wrong about that? Jeez. Maybe I'm just wrong about that. But
apparently I'm wrong about that. Okay.
Kripp 爭啲嚇到Jonathan.
Anyway, Breach, I'm a big fan of. There's a few things.
Anyways， 總之答翻呢個答案先。佢就話有啲係大家都中意嘅，例如 Ultimatum 嗰啲咧，佢哋都會嘗試去將佢拎翻入去 POE2 嘅。咁其中一個佢自己都幾中意嘅啦，就係 Breach。咁樣Kripp 就話話 Legion 好似係 Breach 之前嘅，咁Jonathan 就開始懷疑人生啦，冇理由嘅喎 ，Breach 冇可能係遲過 Legion 發生嘅喎。個原因就係因為喺內部其實 Legion 一開始設計嘅時候咧，佢哋係叫做 Breach 2.0 嘅，所以我都好明白點解佢幾肯定唔係。但係聽完Kripp講冇理由嘅，佢哋通常熟過我哋，冇理由唔信佢啊，唔通真係自己錯咗？所以係幾好笑。
Like Delirium is pretty cool. There's definitely some cool things like that.
戰網咧，戰網又係其中一個。
Generally speaking, though, a lot of the leagues that are my favorite ones are the ones which involve, and I know this is kind of can be a bit in the community. People have different opinions about this. But I do particularly like the ones that involve there being some kind of map that has interesting mechanics on it, and you go out and you do stuff on it, which is why I particularly like things like Delve. But I know in the community, a lot of people prefer leagues that are inside, an area. So we tend to try to have a mix. I like when it comes to designing leagues, my favorite way to do it is kind of look at other games and be like, okay, what are some interesting, like other games from completely different genres, and be like, how can we do some of the interesting gameplay from one of these and make it into a PoE league? So that's kind of tends to be what I most enjoy. And so I was kind of one of the people who really enjoyed things like Harvest, even though it was way too complicated and there were all sorts of problems with it. And I don't like the way Harvest.
Before 佢開始講 Harvest 之前咧，咁就講咗佢頭先嗰一忽就係話啦，佢自己本人嚟講咧，佢係中意一啲喺 其他地方要做埋一啲嘢嘅機制嘅。咁雖然個社群裏邊有好多人都唔中意，就係完全脫離咗個打圖嘅體驗嘅嗰啲機制啦，但係佢自己係幾享受嘅。另外咧就係等啦，呢幾隻嘢有啲難打，因為又中咗個 Pride， 跟住有一隻嘢識得流血，令到我食嗰個物理傷害好痛。哇！搞掂埋呢隻嘢先 ，OK。啊，就係呢隻嘢令到我流血，兩隻嘢加埋就不得了，嗰個承受傷害高度。
Is now. But the old way harvest was things like that were really cool. But yeah, there were issues for sure.
Well, other than the game,
另外一樣咧就係佢設計唔同機制嘅時候咧，佢都係嘗試揾一啲喺其他 game 裏邊先至有嘅嘢，然後睇下點樣可以融入落去 POE 裏邊嘅。例如好似 Blight 啦，好似 Harvest 咁樣，但係 Harvest 咧就有其他更加複雜嘅問題存在，咁所以咧佢係啦。就冇認真咁樣講到底 Harvest 相關嘅嘢。
play side of things, one thing that I think is really important personally for a league mechanic is that it offers something you can't get anywhere else. Like if you want to double corrupt an item, then you do template. Just have to. You can't get.
For sure.
Yeah. So is that going to be at least thought process behind league design in POE2?
100%. It's very important that that is what the end game makes the end game feel like there's a lot of variety, because you've got different goals. Like, now I have to do this, now I have to do this. It adds a lot of variety to things. So it's really important that different content has different rewards that are possible from.
Kripp 就話，仲有一樣嘢佢自己覺得每一個機制都好緊要嘅，就係有一個屬於專係佢自己嘅機制先至可以揾到嘅內容。例如咧，佢舉嘅例子就係穿越裏邊啦 ，incursion 嗰個神廟啦，可以做嘅雙瓦啦，嗰個就淨係可以喺嗰度揾到嘅啫。咁樣就令到佢有一個非常之獨特嘅特性喺度。佢又想知道到底喺 POE2嘅機制啦，設計佢新嘅機制嘅時候咧，呢一個理念會唔會依然係秉承落去啊？定還是係會有所改變咧？Jonathan 就話啦，呢一樣嘢咧，佢哋都覺得係非常之重要嘅，亦都係因為有呢一樣嘢啦，先至令到 POE 嘅 end game 感覺上係咁多元化，咁多嘢可以做嘅。原來 CI 角色嚟嘅呢個 ，OK。所以咧，佢哋係會繼續秉承翻呢一個傳統或者呢一個理念去設計 POE2 新嘅機制嘅。
For sure.
I have a few questions about specific skills. Now, there's been a lot of new skills highlighted, a lot of combination of skills, a lot of skill modification with a few of the supports you've highlighted. But there are a few skills in POE1 that I feel have kind of become the game for some players. So I wanted to kind of point those out, and if you can, maybe mention if there will be a skill like it in POE2. So first up on the list,
呢一條咧就同技能有關嘅問題嚟嘅。Kripp 就話啦，隨住 POE 一路成長嘅時候咧，其實對於某啲人嚟講咧 ，POE 嘅技能咧就已經係隻 game 嚟噶啦。咁佢就想知道呢一啲咁標誌性或者對啲玩家有咁深刻印象嘅技能，會唔會喺 POE2 裏邊重現呢？咁當中咧就包括依家佢會講嘅嗰堆技能。
As probably many people might expect me to ask you, is Righteous Fire. Will we have a Righteous Fire in POE2?
There will be Righteous Fire.
Will
it work
be Righteous
exactly
Fire.
identically? No, but ideally it should feel like the same type of thing, and the flavor of Righteous Fire should all come across completely. But ideally we can do it in a way where it feels like there's interesting combos with it, has interesting mechanics that can work alongside it, and so on. So, absolutely there will be Righteous Fire.
喺個表上面，第一個就係正火 RF。Jonathan 亦都 confirm 咗啦，係絕對會有正火呢一招技能嘅，但係咧就應該會有所改動嘅。但係改完之後咧，應該嗰個感覺啦，又或者嗰個主題咧，同依家嘅 RF 咧係非常之接近嘅。總之咧係會有 RF 啦，唔需要擔心。 又係加伙計嚟嘅，喂，條頸鏈都加伙計嘅。
And ideally, there should be any kind of really iconic thing from POE1, like any kind of iconic skill. We will really need to find a place for it in POE2 as well. We did have a discussion about the exact mechanics of how Righteous Fire works. We did come up with a plan, so hopefully you guys will enjoy it when we talk about it. I believe it should be in the Templar announcement at some point.
Okay.
好啦。佢話任何喺 POE1 裏邊特別有標誌性嘅技能咧，都應該咧係需要喺 POE2 嗰度重現嘅。咁佢哋自己內部咧，的確係進行過都幾次相關嘅討論啦，已經明確知道咗到底喺 POE2 裏邊嘅正火會係點㗎啦。而且佢相信咧喺未來嚟緊嘅 Templar 啦，即係中文係咪無糖聖爭啊？無糖聖爭嘅嗰條 POE2 嘅片裏邊咧，就會講同正火有關嘅啦，咁到時啦有閃打我就 OK， 有啊，閃打已經喺度噶啦，閃打係 confirm 咗一定喺度啊，唔需要擔心。POE 三寶啊，正火閃打同埋旋風斬係咪？追佢標誌性係咪升堂 ？OK。聖堂武則 ，sorry， 我講咗咩冇堂聖。聖堂武則 ，anyways， 你明就得啦。最長頸嗰個人，繼續聽佢講。
Well, closer to home for me is about minions. Now, you have mentioned that minions exist in POE2, so we know that already. But I was personally curious if there is more of a push towards temporary minions, as there kind of is now in POE1. Like the scaling from passive minions has kind of fallen off over the years in recent patches, and the scaling for temporary minions has actually increased over that same time span.
Right. I have a lot of ideas around minions, and we're going to be talking about that when we announce the witch stuff later. I guess next year, technically still. So there's going to be a big discussion about that, and we've got a lot of features there. We put a lot of thought into minions. It's obviously one of those things that action RPG people, like there are a certain class of people who play action RPGs who that's all they want to play. So we have to make sure that we've got a really, really good minion story, as it were. Because of that, minions are going to get a lot of attention, and you'll see that fairly soon, I think.
Now, one thing with minions.
下一個問題咧就係同呢一個召喚有關嘅，到底召喚會改成點咧？因為最近咧就好似 POE 越嚟越將嗰啲唔係永久嘅 minion 啦，即係好似喪屍啊嗰啲咧就飛收咗，轉變成嘅咧就係一啲比較有時限性嘅，好似赦免啦、Absolution 啦，又或者 Summon Raging Spirit、SRS 呢個憤怒狂靈嗰類型嘅召喚。咁到底喺 POE2 裏邊會係召喚嘅方向係點樣咧？Jonathan 就話佢哋對召喚亦都有所已經有所對策，有所決定㗎啦。咁樣喺遲啲咧，我哋已經知道咗嘅就係喺女巫相關嘅嗰一條片裏邊咧，就會講多啲關於召喚嘅資訊嘅。
That kind of comes as a drawback in POE1 is kind of the visual clarity. Where once I have more of a powerful summoner and I'm summoning more minions and they have like more AoE in their attacks, I feel like the visual clarity of just me being able to see the boss mechanics kind of starts going down and down. In POE1 there has this like setting which is like bloom, but that affects both things. It affects both the boss mechanics in some cases as well as like your skills and the minion skills. So there's no like great way to kind of maintain full clarity of the boss mechanics. But I am stronger, so I don't know. It's kind of been a trade-off in POE1. Is there some address to this in POE2?
There isn't like a specific technical, like here's the specific solution, but I can tell you that visual clarity of minions is like the primary concern that I have around minions for sure when looking at this stuff.
Preparian 就提出咗另外一個同召喚有關嘅 疑慮啊，就係喺 POE1 裏邊咧，隨住你嘅角色越強大嘅時候啦，特別玩召喚嘅時候啦，你畫面可以睇到嘅嘢咧就越嚟越少啦。咁去到一個地步咧，就係基本上你冇辦法睇到隻王用緊啲咩技或者任何嘅嘢嘅。咁當然啦，喺乜都睇唔到嘅情況之下咧，佢嘅角色又的而且確係強咗嘅。咁呢一個係咪就係 POE 想要嘅trade off 咧，即係咪一個 POE 想要嘅取捨，定還是喺 POE2 裏邊會有所改善呢？ Jonathan 就話啦 ，visual clarity 啦，即係成個能見度啦，嗰個清晰度啦，係喺 POE2 裏邊其中一個好大嘅話題嚟嘅，一個佢哋關注度極高嘅嘢，特別係針對住同召喚物有關嘅嗰個能見度嘅。咁咧，佢哋咧喺呢一方面着手有好多嘅改善，但係佢哋暫時咧就唔會公佈住嘅。
Because that is how you know, there is a certain feeling you want with minions where you kind of like in POE1 it just feels like chaos a lot of the time. Like there's just shit everywhere. Like it doesn't feel like there's a front line, as it were, and things like there's these kinds of issues. I want to try and make it feel a bit different in POE2. So we do have a lot of like stuff around this, and even if you looked at the whiteboard in my office right now, like half the issues on there are visual clarity to do with minion issues right now. So yeah, it's definitely a concern. It's just a matter of like a bit.
咁講翻先。佢頭先笑過一部分，我笑過一部分咧，就係 Jonathan 話咧喺 POE1依家啦，召喚物咧的確係好有問題嘅，甚至乎咧係可以用混亂啦去表達成件事嘅。基本上咧，你 Summoner 越勁嘅時候咧，成個畫面咧都係嘢嚟㗎，你唔會再睇到任何嘢㗎啦。所以咧，對於佢哋嚟講咧，甚至乎喺佢自己個 office 裏邊嘅嗰塊白板上邊啦，有絕大部分所寫要理會或者要整嘅咧，就係同召喚物嘅能見度有關嘅，所以咧絕對係個優先度非常之高嘅一樣嘢，而且佢哋係會解決嘅。
Just better design really when it comes to what the minions' abilities look like and this kind of stuff, as well as just there's just a lot of it's kind of like 1,000 individual subtle things that kind of add together to make things to have more clarity, and that's kind of true across POE2 in general. Like there's a lot of focus on trying to make sure that there's visual clarity with the skills, even though they look really modern and cool, that there's still clarity. Like because we're get the opportunity to have a bit of a reset here graphically, it means that we can consider very carefully like what slots around the enemies do the different effects go in, and like how can we make sure that like we're kind of making sure, okay, like if something's like on like a, and this may actually not be like 100% correct, but it's like if something's on the like blade of the weapon, then that is always a herald effect, for example. Like nothing else is taking that slot on the character, so you kind of know that like like these kind of things are kind of what we're trying to do to make sure that everything has its place, and you kind of always can see things without having to have too much overlap.
Jonathan 如果提到咧，好彩咧，就係佢哋因為 POE2 基本上係一個畫質上邊嘅完全重置啊，唔係重製，係咪咧？係重置啊，令到佢哋喺設計好多嘢方面咧，都可以先考慮咗個能見度嘅。呢個係普通嗰隻嚟嘅啫。咁所以咧，佢哋喺所有嘢方面咧，唔單止係召喚方面咧，佢哋都會着手去做好多細嘅改變，加埋咧就變成一個非常之好嘅能見度或者一個遊戲清晰度噶啦。咁希望咧就唔會再有好似以前嘅問題。
And hopefully, I mean, sure, a little bit of that goes out the door a little bit when you start having MTXs heavily involved. But
當然有 MTX 嘅時候嘅話，就另當別論。
Should be very good if we're doing our job well.
Okay. So bit of a subject swap here. In POE1, when it comes to designing a character, a lot of it kind of has to do with putting check marks on defensive goals. So the first round of goals is like avoiding lockouts, so you don't get stunned, don't get frozen. And then the second one is usually don't get killed by physical damage, because physical damage is unique in a way where more of it just ruins your ability to stack armor. And the third one is just like, does this character get one shot from typical stuff that happens to it? Is this kind of going to be a similar checklist in POE2, or is it a different approach to defenses?
I don't know that it's not particularly easy to necessarily avoid that. But what I would say is that I would hope that we don't get to the point where you have to feel like every character needs to be completely immune to certain mechanics. Like ideally, it should be a reasonable choice to choose between: is this something I'm mitigating, or is this something I'm completely preventing? So that should always feel like it's a choice. But at the same time, like having certain things you need to be able to deal with as part of a build is, like part of the, I guess, the trade-off you're making when it comes to how like you need a bit of tension to make defense, like to make it so that you don't just make a complete glass cannon with zero attention paid to defense at all. You do need to some extent to have like how am I going to deal with this particular problem? So I think that will still be a thing, but I can't promise that the exact details around it will be the same in POE2. This is honestly something that I am not myself as involved with, I would say, as some other people on the team. I mean, obviously I still kind of like, talk about the stuff, but people like Rory and Mark tend to be a little bit more, like knowing about, like have specific thoughts around that stuff.
Well,
佢 pairing 呢次嘅問題咧就話啦，喺 POE1 裏邊啦，我哋每一個角色啦都好似對防禦面有一個好大嘅清單咁樣。你如果想隻人生存到嘅話啦，你又要可能防禦某一啲先防禦雲啦，跟住唔可以俾人冰凍啦，跟住亦都要有可能對物理傷害嘅減免啊，又或者將佢轉換咗啊，等等等等嘅嘢。總之每一個角色砌起上嚟咧，就有非常非常之多嘅顧慮嘅。咁到底喺 POE2 裏邊係咪亦都係同一樣嘢咧？會唔會都係有好多嘢需要顧慮咧 ？Jonathan 就話咧，佢希望喺 POE2 裏邊咧就唔會令到每一個角色都需要防禦晒所有嘢嘅。可能咧，每一個角色就係需要防禦每一樣嘢少少啦，就已經有一個唔錯嘅效果。呢一種係佢比較想要嘅嘢，但係同一時間咧，佢亦都唔希望所有嘢咧都唔需要去理會嘅。亦即係話咧，如果你可以完全無視咗絕大部分嘅問題嘅話咧，你每一個角色咧就只會係一個玻璃大炮 glass cannon 嚟嘅啫。咁佢哋希望咧呢一啲嘢咧都即係呢一啲負面嘅影響咧。其中一個作用咧，就係令到你嘅角色啦，或者你自己本人啦，去真係認真審視一下，到底邊一啲防禦面你係想要，而唔係每一個角色都係砌一隻玻璃大炮出嚟咁樣去玩呢個遊戲。不過講起防禦面呢一樣嘢啦，大家都要記住喺 POE2 嗰個 passive 啦，嗰個天賦樹裏邊啦，係冇好似依家 POE1 嗰個天賦樹咁樣，周圍都係有生命啊咁樣。佢當時就話係完全冇嘅，咁我唔知道係100% 完全冇啊。但係有一啲核心天賦可能都仲係有少少加血嘅。淨係呢一方面就已經完全改變咗我哋對防禦面嘅認知，或者對天賦樹嘅配搭噶啦。所以係咯，呢一啲要等遲啲，我哋再多啲資訊先至可以再理解得到。實質上佢今日所講嘅希望每一種防禦面有少少都已經可以達到去一個唔錯或者舒服嘅程度，嗰個係有幾真實咯。
Maybe this isn't too apt of a question, but I'll ask it anyway. Will you perhaps eventually be able to trivialize a mechanic entirely? Like, I know the stun mechanic in POE2 is much more sophisticated than POE1, but are you able to make a character that's completely ignoring stuns of all kinds if you want?
There should always be a way to do that. The cost of it should always be something, right? You know what I mean? So, like, I mean, there's absolutely will be a unique that's going to be like Yukagi stunned, right? There's going to be uniques like that.
Okay.
There may be a keystone that does like that does that in exchange for some kind of big downside, but there always just has to be a downside in order for that to be able to happen. And then, of course, you should be able to invest in stun reduction to the point where it no longer phases you as well, right? This kind of thing should be possible. So that should always be possible. It's just always like cost benefit, right? Like, what are you, what are you trading for that?
In terms of character design, I think it's maybe, at least for me, one of the best thing that POE1 does, where it always seems difficult to get enough of everything. Like, you can make a character that does millions or even like a billion damage, but you can only...
唔好意思啊，停慢咗，俾個尖網嚇親。Anyways， 頭先嗰一忽啦，佢就係話啦，咁喺 POE2 裏邊會唔哇呢隻咩嚟㗎 ？Anyways， 喺 POE2 裏邊會唔會 會唔會有機會可以好似依家 POE 1裏邊咁樣完全無視咗個某一啲負面嘅影響咧？例如你好唔中意雲嘅，會唔會依然係有手段可以去到完全免雲嘅狀態啊？定還是喺 POE 2裏邊係冇咗呢一樣嘢咧 ？Jonathan 就話啦，呢一樣嘢咧係必須要有嘅，但係咧可以做到咧就唔代表個成本低嘅。佢覺得呢一啲咧就絕對需要有翻一定嘅成本喺度。佢就舉咗個例，話唔定有一件傳奇裝係會令到你可以免雲嘅，又或者話唔定有一個，哇，搞唔掂啊！點解我要行一塊鏡咧 ？Anyways， 唔好俾我嘅，唔好俾我呢一個打亂咗呢一忽先。只要個代價夠高嘅話咧，其實佢哋唔介意有呢一樣嘢，只不過係點樣去衡量個代價，同埋個代價有幾高咧，就係佢哋需要作出嘅考量嚟嘅。跟住 play 翻呢度啦。
Really do that if you have no defenses, or you can make a character that's extremely tanky, but the damage ends up being lackluster to a point where you literally have to tank more things.
For sure.
Is this going to be a similar approach to POE2 character design?
Absolutely. And this has actually come up when we were discussing the tree about like things like, okay, so this is another tree philosophy thing, is like, okay, should it be that the reason that you get a variety of things on the tree is because there just aren't enough nodes for a given thing to be able to do that? Or should it be that there's always enough nodes to be able to allocate for a given thing? It's just that you don't want to do that because you've got other concerns that you need to do. And I think it's the second one that's important. Like, if you really want to allocate every single point into, some particular stat that's, freeze reduction or something random like that, then there will be nodes for you to do that. It's just that you don't want to do that because, that's not the only important thing. And I think that's kind of just generally how we look at our philosophy around this stuff.
All right.
喺 POE 1裏邊咧 Kripp 就話啦，我哋如果想嘅話咧，可以令到一隻角色非常之硬淨啦，但係咧基本上就冇 dam 嘅。跟住又或者咧，可以令到個人咧完全冇生存面，但係就非常之高輸出嘅。咁到底喺 POE 2裏邊嘅天賦樹會唔會都容許我哋有呢一個自由度咧？跟住阿 Jonathan 咧就話啦，喺 POE 2裏邊咧都係可以做到呢一類型嘅嘢嘅。對於佢哋嚟講咧，就係一個設計天賦樹嘅理念又或者哲學啦。咁到底應該一個天賦樹係因為太少某一樣嘢，導致你必須要分散投資去唔同嘅嘢啊？定還是一個天賦樹裏邊應該係你想要嘅嘢就一定會足夠嘅？只不過有太多嘢你都會好想要，所以導致到你自己去分散投資咧。佢覺得咧後者咧係一個比較好嘅方向嚟嘅，所以咧喺設計 POE 2嘅天賦樹咧，佢哋依然係秉承呢一個理念去設計嘅。
So some people aren't quite aware because it's one class here, one class there, and we haven't seen a lot of like the trailers for the classes that already exist in POE1, which we have at least heard of a little bit that they're being redesigned in some ways. But eventually, we're going to have 36 ascendancy classes in POE2. And my first question is, if we have like twice as many ascendancy classes, is there going to be a different design in like the lifetime of a character when a new league comes out or a new content update comes out? Like, are you expecting players to play like many characters in each season, or like one or two, kind of how they are in POE1?
Kripp 就喺呢一度問啦，佢就話啦，喺 POE 2裏邊咧就有非常非常之多嘅角色啦。而且咧，每一個角色都有3個升華，咁樣 total 咧就有36個升華，或者係12個角色咁多嘅。咁到底喺 POE 咁到底喺 POE 2裏邊，佢哋係依然係死緊。anyways， 佢到底係依然覺得我哋玩家係每季都淨係可能開1-2隻啊，定還是係基本上係希望我哋每個角色或者每個玩家都會開多過2-3隻角色，係開一紮角色去試多啲唔同嘅升華。係 anyways， 呢一張圖我打唔掂㗎啦，係咪都
I think it would just be like how it is in POE1, honestly. The fact that there's a lot of options there, I mean, the intention is for POE2 to last a long time, right? So, like, ideally, like having more classes like that just means that it's going to be a lot longer before you have run out of stuff to try. So ultimately, that's the reason why there's so many, that we just want to have a lot of stuff that you can to play around with. So yeah, I imagine that in each league it's going to be 1 to 2 characters, just like it is in POE1.
In POE1
喺 POE2 裏邊咧，佢哋設計嘢嘅目的咧，就係希望隻 game 可以維持到一個比較長嘅時間嘅。咁好多個角色咧，就純粹係令到你可能會每一個嘢裏邊玩少少角色，可能要去嘥嘅時間，可能原本喺 POE1 可能講緊1年嘅，而去到 POE2 因為多咗1倍嘅升華，就可能變咗到2年咁樣，去延長咗你可以試嘅嘢，延長咗你可以試晒嘅嗰個可能性。而唔係希望大家每一季玩多啲角色嗰種取向嘅，純粹係希望可以多啲內容，等大家要玩嘅內容咧，亦都會多啲，就係咁嘅啫。
It's taking like dedicated players that are focusing on leveling. I'm not going to say some days, which are like the fastest times, but let's say like a week to hit max level. Is that kind of like a goalpost that you guys are trying to hit in POE2 as well in terms of the pacing for a character?
I think it should take a bit longer than a week. I sort of feel like I'd want to go back a little bit in terms of how long it takes to be more like what it was like sort of 3 to 4 years ago, I would say. Where it was a bit longer. But I mean, it'll take people a while just to sort of learn the game, I think. So I suspect the first time people play the content, it's going to take them quite a while. Like as I was saying before, like
Kripp 就話啦，依家 POE1 裏邊啦，你要將隻角色升到100 level 啦，就先唔好講最快嘅，就純粹係24個鐘頭或者一段非常之短嘅時間之內，1到2日之內就已經搞掂咗啦。Let's say 講緊嘅係1個禮拜就可以將隻角色升到100 level 噶啦。咁到底喺 POE2 裏邊佢係咪都係展望玩家係用翻咁上下時間就可以升到去滿等封頂100 level 咧 ？Jonathan 就話啦，佢唔係咁中意依家呢一個節奏嘅，佢希望咧可以嗰個時間拉翻長啲，翻去好似大概3-4年前嗰個速度咁。3-4年前係幾耐咧？係幾快咧？我就已經唔記得咗啦。但係就總之係慢過依家嘅。
The first time I beat a boss earlier, it was like 5 minutes, and then like that went down on my second time to like 2 minutes. So even just from that perspective, like and it slowly improves. So I think that people will get faster and faster. So
而且咧，佢亦都可以預見嘅咧，就係任何人第一次玩 POE2 咧，都要一段比較長嘅時間先至可以適應到嘅。佢用翻佢自己頭先打 boss 嗰個例子啦，由第一次可能用咗5分鐘，第二次就可能用咗2分鐘左右。嗰一隻 boss 就已經快咗1倍嘅時間啦。一個 campaign 裏邊咧有過百隻 boss， 咁你自己可以計到慳翻嘅時間就爭好遠。換句話說啦，你要升 level 嘅時間咧，亦都會大幅縮短嘅。
I mean, I honestly don't know at this point how long it will take people the first time through the campaign, and I suspect it'll take them a very long time. But yeah, it'll get faster.
What is a very long time?
I honestly don't know for sure, because we don't have like the entire, like not every area is like fully like it's not playable. I mean, all the areas are there, but they're not playable in the sense that like if you have bad monsters, like when I say bad, I mean like monsters that don't have like all their abilities and stuff like that in an area, it's just boring. So like nobody wants to play those areas. So that means that we don't really have like proper progression testing. Like we've polished the first half of each act kind of thing, and so we haven't got like a sort of full, like you can just play through the whole game to do progression testing yet. So that means that I can't actually say how long it will take, but I honestly believe that like for an average player, I mean like got to be at least 40-50 hours, I think.
Oh wow.
I imagine that's how long it will take sort of your average player to get through. Like it could be longer, honestly, for people who like haven't played an action RPG before, probably.
喺呢一度啦，咁樣阿 Jonathan 咧，佢就話啦，佢相信大家第一次玩 POE2 嘅時候咧，會過章嘅速度咧都會係比較慢嘅，因為有好多嘢需要練啦，就好似頭先所講咁樣啦。然後阿 Kripp 就追問啦，你所講嘅比較慢或者比較長嘅時間係講緊幾長先？Jonathan 咧就話啦，佢唔可以俾到一個好正確嘅答案，因為佢哋始終咧未有一個進度嘅測試，有好多地區咧佢哋都仲未完成。講緊嘅咧係啲怪物仲未完成，可能就係一啲好 basic 嘅 AI 喺裏邊啦。 佢哋依家咧仲係做緊每一個章節，即係佢哋依家嘅進度啦，大概係每一個章節最頭嘅嗰幾個關卡咁上下嘅啫。咁所以咧，佢所俾嘅時間咧就絕對唔準確嘅，但係咧佢可以見得到嘅咧就係講緊第一次玩 POE2 嘅時候，喺你完全未玩過啦，一個正常一般嘅玩家啦，就可能需要用到大概40至50個鐘頭去過晒所有章節嘅。咁呢一樣嘢咧，亦都係要記得就係頭先打王嗰個例子啦。當你所有王都可以大幅縮減咗時間，即係可能講緊第二次玩嘅時候，每一隻王都縮減咗一定嘅時間嘅話，可能你呢個時間已經由40-50個鐘，可能拉咗落去講緊20-30個鐘咁樣，然後再加埋你之後再跑多幾次章節之後，你熟咗啦，邊啲地形係需要做，邊啲地形唔需要做，邊啲係會俾技能點你，邊啲係唔需要等等嘅嘢之後咧，你可能可以縮短翻落去 POE1 嘅過章速度都唔奇嘅，但係咧呢啲純粹個人猜測。
So that kind of things. I mean, I guess that's kind of like half an hour per zone when you include like, fighting bosses. Like, I sort of want people to die like 1 to 2 times on each boss the first time they play it, because they haven't learned the mechanics yet. Like, it should feel that way when you're kind of playing through the first time. So that will mean, like that kind of thing. So like it's just a little bit harder, like, but the thing is, I think POE1 may even be that hard for people who just play the game for the first time now. It's just that once you played it, however many times people have played it, it becomes trivial to the point where you're like, okay, I could never die to this thing. But
以暫時嚟估計啦，佢就係話大概可能每一個地區啦，就係需要到30分鐘左右嘅。咁呢個係包括埋打王嘅時間。咁但係 POE1 其實可能都有呢一個難度，只不過係大家已經玩咗咁多年，玩慣玩熟，基本上咧某一啲嘢咧係永遠冇可能再喺章節裏邊殺得到你嘅，完全係因為你已經對嗰個機制非常非常之熟悉，而唔係因為你個角色嘅裝備比以往好等等嘅。咁係咯，總之呢一類型嘅嘢啦，佢亦都希望，佢亦都應該咁講啦。佢亦都希望每一個新嘅玩家啦，第一次面對住一隻新嘅王，可能都會死1-2次先至可以完全學識到佢做緊啲乜嘢，然後通關嘅。咁呢一啲時間啦，加埋啦，都應該係佢所講嘅50-60個鐘頭裏邊嘅時限嚟嘅。
Because of the fact that you actually, that you have to restart the boss if you die to it now. It will force you to actually learn the mechanics and kind of, work out these things during your first playthrough.
Okay.
So that'll be interesting. But yeah, it'll take people a while.
All right. Well, that is it for the questions that I had personally, but I have scoured the internet for unanswered questions, and I have picked a few up from chat. And if you guys want to post your question in chat, if it's at least different enough from what we've already discussed or what I have, I'll maybe try to include it near the end. But
基本上佢準備咗嘅問題就已經問晒啦，咁依家咧就係收集現場觀眾嘅問題。
So we don't have Jonathan forever. But yes, with that in mind, I want to ask some of the questions. They might be a little bit less researched than some of my own, so might brace yourself for some short answers, but that's okay, hopefully. So here we go. I found this one on a YouTube comment, I believe. I think it was on the official thread of this interview on the POE forums. So tell us about the die system you mentioned in 2019. I don't know anything about this, so please.
Yeah, I guess I probably mentioned that back in ExileCon back in 2019. It's something that we could still do, but it's not honestly something that I've kind of thought about for a little while. I know it's something that a lot of players are very keen for, but it's kind of not really on my radar at this point. Like, we're just focusing on content, really. But there's nothing really preventing us from doing it. It would just be a matter of marking up all the armors and the parts that get modified and so on.
呢一個咧就係 die 咧，即係染料啦。佢問緊2019年 ExileCon 裏邊，佢曾經提及過有染料嘅系統嘅。咁呢一樣嘢依家到底發展成點啊 ？Jonathan 咧就話啦，呢一樣嘢咧喺佢當時提及完到依家咧，其實就已經個優先度變咗做好低下。佢哋如果想做嘅話，相信都依然係可以做到嘅，只不過係個優先度真係非常之低咁解啫。
So it's just a bunch of work there. But yeah, it can be done. I don't know if really it would be there at release. It's kind of I know that
喺推出嘅時候都應該唔會有
kind of one of
嘅意
those
思啊
things。that has kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit as we've been grinding out on a bunch more content, unfortunately.
All right. So 99% of POE2 misgivings have been about the gameplay pace. Now, you've kind of adjusted this a little bit, but I kind of want to ask it again and ask you how is it current relative to maybe what we've seen a few months ago at ExileCon? Is that still kind of what we're expecting? Or is that, as you mentioned, a bit slowed down so people can kind of see the clarity a little bit?
呢一個問題咧，就係問緊到底遊戲嘅速度係咪都仲係好似喺 ExileCon 嗰陣時睇到一樣咁慢呢？定還是係純粹係因為喺 ExileCon 嗰陣時啦，又或者其他展示嘅方面啦，佢想令到大家容易啲睇得到發生緊啲咩事，所以先減慢呢？到底 POE2 嘅速度係有幾慢或者有幾快呢？
So I guess I kind of don't really like. Okay, so a lot of people are like, oh, you know, you're slowing it down to do this, or you're kind of, you know, like they have a lot of things like that. But I think really when it comes to when we're like, so this actually relates to a little bit what I was saying before about how we haven't been able to do full progression testing yet. Which is that what that means is that when we're balancing an area to do a demonstration or for ExileCon, the demos and all that sort of stuff, we kind of just like. We make a character that's about what we think it should be for this area, and then we kind of balance the monsters from that point for the demo to just kind of hit like what we want, where we expect to sort of be able to understand the mechanics and kind of like give a good showing to how the class should be. I think at ExileCon,
喺度停一停先。佢話喺 ExileCon 嗰陣時啦，又或者佢一路都喺度強調一樣嘢，就係佢哋咪有一個叫做進度測試嘅嘢。乜嘢意思咧？就係例如喺 ExileCon 嘅時候，佢哋展示咗一個地區俾我哋試玩啊，又或者喺唔同嘅示範片裏邊展示咗一堆嘢俾我哋睇啦。嗰堆嘢嗰個平衡咧，就係純粹佢哋假設。如果係喺呢個 level 咁，大概應該係會有啲乜嘢嘅進度，或者個角色嘅能力應該係去到邊一度，而去每一區獨立作出平衡，而唔係一個由頭到尾，即係可能 Act 1就係大概咁多 damage，Act 2就大概咁多 damage， 係一個獨立嘅測試嚟嘅，或者獨立嘅設定嚟嘅，所以咧就真係完全唔可以反映到最後嘅成品係點，甚至乎連佢哋自己咧都未清楚。當我哋封測嘅時候，當我哋可以玩到封測嘅時候，嗰一區嘅難度或者我哋嘅角色喺嗰陣時嘅速度到底有幾快或者有幾慢嘅。
It probably was balanced a little hard. But the thing is, each demo is kind of its own thing because of the fact that, yeah, like as I said, we don't have a full like sort of progression test through the whole game yet. So ExileCon, like because of these demos are just like how they are. Effectively, what it is just like me and Mark will play it, and then we'll be like, did we get through it too quickly or didn't we? And then adjust accordingly. So we just adjust it until it feels fun to us. So I think when people maybe sort of ascribe a little bit too much to that sometimes. That being said, I think that it's probably best to look at the pacing stuff to be more like when we were discussing earlier with maps and what the median player versus the 1% players would be doing. I think we still want to make sure that there's still a 10 times disparity in efficiency between a good and a bad player in that situation. And so that would certainly imply that there can be certainly a pretty good amount of pace you can get up to. But what I do think is also bad, and I guess this is another philosophical thing.
喺度停一停佢先又。佢再一次強調啦，喺每一次嘅 demo 啊，又或者我哋試玩裏邊咧，純粹係根據佢本人同埋阿 Mark 兩個覺得好玩嘅咧，就喺嗰度停噶啦。但係咧，佢希望咧大家唔好睇嗰啲片啦，又或者聽翻我或者其他人講喺 ExileCon 玩嗰陣時嗰個速度係點樣去作一個準則嘅。因為如果你諗翻頭先早少少嘅時候啦，講緊跌裝嗰陣時，講緊1000倍或者快10倍嘅嗰樣嘢啦，你亦都可以即刻聯想得到一個一般嘅玩家同一個最頂尖嘅玩家嗰個速度係爭到10倍嘅時候啦，咁你就可以想像得到嗰個速度咧其實唔會慢得去邊嘅。如果唔係嘅話咧，你所謂嘅10倍咧就變咗唔係20分鐘同2分鐘嘅分別，係講緊1個鐘同6分鐘嘅分別。咁呢一樣嘢係冇可能發生嘅。所以咧。 就唔好俾暫時所睇到嘅片段嘅速度去太過左右咗你對 POE2 嘅印象。
Thing is that I don't think it's really good when you someone opens up Path of Exile on Twitch. They look at what the game looks like at the absolute 1% end of it, and it just looks like utter, just like what is even going on the screen. You know, it's just like shit is everywhere. There's like there's no visual clarity. I cannot tell what the hell is going on, and the boss melts in like 2 seconds. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that's really very good either. So you do need to be able to get a lot more efficiency than the average player, but we do have to be a little bit careful.
喺另一方面啦，佢亦都覺得啦，喺打開 Twitch 嘅時候啦，一個新嘅玩家如果望到 POE 嘅玩法嘅話咧，係完全唔知發生緊咩事㗎。咁好明顯就唔係講緊你哋啱啱一路睇緊上邊嘅我打緊嘅嗰啲㗎啦。佢哋就話啦，好多時候啦，即係基本上個畫面咧就花到完全乜都睇唔到嘅，根本唔知嗰個人喺度做緊乜。然後咧，甚至乎一見到隻王咧，就係下一秒咧就已經唔見咗，或者1秒都冇就已經冇咗㗎啦。咁呢啲嘢咧就絕對唔會存在喺我嘅 stream 嗰度嘅，大家可以放心，我呢邊咧係好 healthy 嘅。
I don't know, like I guess all of that is to say that like it's a little bit hard to say exactly what the pace will be like in maps at this point. I have no doubt that the peak will still be high but it may not be as high as it currently is in POE1. I think that's very likely. But at the same time, like it's really important that people feel like they're able to break the game. Like you want people to feel like, oh, I'm breaking the game right now. I'm like got an insane amount of projectiles, like way more than I should be able to have, like all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I guess this is a bit of a hedged non-answer, which I worry is a bit of a problem here.
Well, it's still in development. I can't fault you for that.
John, sorry.
Right.
The way that
Jonathan 咧，佢就話啦，佢都相信啦，其實嗰個速度啦，依然係會係快嘅，只不過咧就絕對唔會去到 POE1 嗰個最快嗰啲速度噶啦。呢一樣嘢佢哋都唔係咁希望嘅，但係實質上係點樣咧？佢亦都唔可以俾到一個太準確嘅答案，因為佢哋未試過啦，而且佢哋亦都未係有一個好明確嘅方向。咁佢亦都話佢自己唔係好希望俾到一個咁模棱兩可嘅答案我哋嘅。不過咧，暫時佢真係可以做到嘅答案咧，就真係咁多啫。佢 Parent 都話啦，咁畢竟隻遊戲都仲係喺度開發嘅中途啦，咁唔知呢一堆答案都係正常。呢個標應該係其他人睇唔知玩緊啫。都啱嘅，咁你起碼睇到啲怪物做緊咩啊嘛，你睇唔到我做緊咩啫，唔緊要嘅。
I asked the question was, kind of seeing post-Ruthless Experiment, what your thoughts may be on the matter.
And you're definitely right that it's the number one issue that people talk about POE2. Like the fear in the POE1 community is that it's just going to be super slow paced. And I don't think it will feel that way. I think that when you play it, you will have fun. Ultimately, that's all that I'm after, right? Like, so it's actually interesting because there's been cases of this, right? Where like I was playing the Mercenary in the demo for the demo that we recorded, and then I went back and I played what was it I was playing? I think it might have been the Warrior actually. Afterwards. The demo character we had at ExileCon, I was like, man, this is way too slow. So even just from me, like it can often be the case that my opinions change as I'm playing as I'm playing things. This is really going to come down to the progression testing to kind of see how we feel. But I guess the main the guiding star, I suppose, at the end of the day, has to be that when you get an item, you feel like it improved your character. Because if you don't have that, then you have nothing. Like we still have to maintain that feeling through the whole game.
喺呢一度咧，佢頭先就話啦，其實喺佢哋自己測試嘅時候咧，特別佢就引咗一個例子啦。喺佢自己試完 Mercenaries 用兵嗰條片，整完嗰條片之後咧，跟住又翻去玩戰士啦，玩嗰個戰士嘅時候咧，佢就突然間發覺，隻戰士好似真係有啲太慢喎。咁對佢哋嚟講咧，應該話對佢自己本身嚟講啦， 都可以有一個咁180度嘅轉變，由可能 Warrior 佢覺得冇問題嘅，因為畢竟都係由佢同阿 Mark 兩個決定好唔好玩，個速度如何。喺佢試完啲嘢之後，或者可能唔同嘅日子裏邊，佢又有唔同嘅體驗。咁呢一啲速度啊等等嘅嘢咧，完完全全咧都真係要取決於到佢哋有一個實質嘅進度測試之後，得出一個結果或者一個結論啦，先至可以再作判斷嘅。喺度再俾多少少 background 大家先。Warrior 啦，戰士呢一個職業啦，喺 ExileCon 嘅 demo 裏邊係咁多隻角色之中最慢嘅一隻角色嚟嘅。講緊咧，佢有嘅招式咧就可以，即係好似嗱，你依家望翻我 POE 個畫面先。我依家呢一個起手咧，就大概係佢每一招嘅速度嚟嘅。然後咧，佢額外仲有一招咧，係需要儲唔知2秒定係3秒先至可以用到嘅技能。而嗰2-3秒咧係企定儲，唔係行緊咁樣儲，唔係好似 Torchlight 嗰啲所謂嘅引導技，而係一個真係企定定，將個錘仔唔知斧頭啦拎高咗，然後集氣，然後揼落去嘅一下攻擊。而佢每一下，但係咧喺 ExileCon 裏邊啦，佢最唔同嘅地方就係我依家呢一度用一下呢個攻擊啦，就淨係企定嘅啫。但係喺 ExileCon 嗰度，如果我指過嚟呢一度嘅話咧，我個人咧可能喺呢一度隻手遞起緊，一路向前行，行到嚟呢一度嘅時候，即係嗰對手咧就會拍落地下，然後咧即使係一個好慢嘅角色都好啦，你係會覺得流暢嘅。喂，早晨啊 KI。
And there has to be a feeling of progress as you go through. So yeah, like that's we'll I guess end up where we end up, where it honestly, and it may sound a bit silly, but it's like it just has to feel fun to me, right? Like I have to play it and feel like this feels fun.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't feel fun to me, then I'll increase the numbers. And that's really what it comes down to.
I have a question about how much of an endgame map is the boss in it, I suppose. You've kind of answered this slightly through your mastery of, repeatedly going up against these bosses and just defeating them faster and faster. Mm-hmm. But I guess we can broadly ask you perhaps, how much of a map that you do in the endgame of POE2 should the boss be?
Yeah, so I think that in terms of drops, at the very least, so we've actually discussed the drops in particular. I think that 1/3 of the map should be boss drops. 1/3 of the map should just be regular monsters. And 1/3 of the map should be other events and things that come up, like league content and things like that. Which isn't to say...
喺呢度嘅問題咧，就應該或者個答案咧，就係答緊到底係一張地圖啦，即係我而家產圖咁樣先算啦。到底一個 map boss 佢會掉落幾多物品咧 ？Jonathan 咧佢就話啦，喺 POE2 裏邊啦，佢哋曾經進行過一個討論，到底啲掉落係點樣分配咧？最後咧，佢哋就覺得應該係有1/3咧係嚟自個 map boss 嘅，即係嗰張地圖嘅王。有1/3咧係應該嚟自普通喺個地圖裏邊原生有嘅怪，然後再有1/3咧係應該嚟自於其他機制加埋嘅。咁呢一個答案咧，其實我係幾擔心嘅，因為聽落咧 map boss 好似多咗 drop 好似好好咁樣啦，但係就會變咗呢個 boss rush 即係直接衝過去殺王嘅 tactic 可能變得最有效最直接嘅玩法，而唔係真係刷圖。依家其實刷王嗰個玩法都已經幾盛行下噶啦，我覺得冇乜必要去令到呢一樣嘢更加盛行嘅。而當然啦，我哋唔知道佢所講嘅嗰個1/3係佢頭先所講話，即係可能係佢掉落嗰個好嘅程度係有1/3，即係可能你有1/3嘅財富或者1/3嘅收入係嚟自於個 map boss 嘅，但係可能個 map boss 唔會幫你可以 sustain 到圖，即係唔會掉落圖啊，你淨係殺佢，你根本唔會可以維持到打圖呢一樣咁基本嘅嘢。如果係咁嘅話咧，咁呢一個1/3咧就有些少唔同嘅睇法嘅。咁但係我印象中咧，佢喺度冇好清楚咁樣交代係乜嘢，我相信佢哋內部都未係有好清楚嘅答案嘅啫。
Necessarily that every map will always have stuff like that, but on average across many maps, it should be about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And ideally, that should roughly map onto the amount of time that you spend doing those things as well. So that's kind of my view on it, at least. Is yeah.
咁佢亦都話啦，喺呢1/3、1/3、1/3咁樣分啦嘅比例裏邊啦，應該係代表你每一樣所做嘅，亦都係個時間啊，所需嘅時間啊，亦都係1/3、1/3嘅。換句話說，係打一張 map 嘅 boss 咧，係需要成張圖1/3嘅時間。呢一個聽落好似好耐咁樣啦。個原因咧係因為 POE2 裏邊佢哋會用翻 POE2 嘅 boss， 即係嗰啲 mechanic 會比較複雜啲啊，可能你需要閃避嘅機率多啲啊，同埋應該啦，如果我冇估計錯誤嘅話咧，你都係一死咗嘅話咧，就要重置成個 map boss， 要重新打過嘅，就好似章節裏邊嗰啲王咁。
Yeah, roughly a third, I would say, should be the map boss.
I don't know if you're fully comfortable answering this one, but inquiring minds are curious. Why did you guys decide to continue working on 1 and 2 at the same time, like separately, rather than evolving POE1 to POE2? I know it was like a big announcement that it's going to be its own project, but I guess people really didn't get the why sufficiently.
So it really comes down to we want to be able to make whatever changes we want to make without it becoming a problem for the existing community. And when we first announced in 2019 what we were planning on doing, I don't think we appreciated at the time the degree to which the changes would actually change the game.
呢一條問題我覺得非常之有意思嘅。首先呢，就係Kripp問到底點解你哋最後決定咗 POE1 同 POE2 拆家，而唔係將 POE1 一路改善到去變成 POE2 呢？呢一樣嘢呢，如果你唔知嘅話咧，喺2019年第一個 ExileCon 裏邊啦，當時佢哋嘅目標呢，就係將 POE1 變成 POE2 嘅。咁啊 Jonathan 暫時答到嘅呢，就係話啦，喺當時啦，其實2019年啦，佢哋冇好認真咁樣去理解得到分拆咗，又或者佢開始整 POE2 嘅時候，有幾多嘢係需要改變嘅。而且咧喺佢哋製作 POE2 嘅時候啦 ，POE1 開始變成咗一個負擔，多過一個可以改善嘅嘢。即係好多時候咧，喺佢哋改緊 POE2 嘅嘢嘅時候咧，都要諗翻啊，但係 POE1 嘅玩家會點，又或者 POE1 裏邊唔係咁樣嘅，呢一類型嘅思想咧就會不停拖佢哋嘅後腳。總之啦，就係簡單啲嚟講，喺2019年嘅時候，佢哋冇一個好清晰，亦都冇好 appreciate， 好我唔知中文叫咩 appreciate， 但係總之冇好欣賞，總之冇 appreciate 啦，冇好 appreciate 到底一個新嘅 game 或者佢哋可以整一個 sequel 一個續作嗰個可能性同埋嗰個可變性同埋可變性咧，亦都係最重要一樣嘢，因為佢哋實質上想改嘅嘢係非常之多。
And so it really just came down to we had people in the office who were like, I'm really worried that the game, I'm talking about people in the QA team and things like that. They were just really worried. I'm worried that the game that you make won't necessarily be the path of Excel that I like, right? I mean, they still look at what we're doing and, they like what we're doing. But there was some worry there. Mm-hmm. And so when I heard that, I kind of thought about it pretty hard for a while. I talked to Mark quite a bit about it. And we kind of said, we really just wanted to be free to be able to let the games diverge without having to constantly work. Because I worried that the decisions that we wanted to make for POE, I didn't want POE1 to hold POE2 back as far as having to make balance decisions. We didn't want to have things where we're we can't change this because then all these players will get angry or things like that. We wanted to be kind of free to be able to just make whatever changes we wanted to make. And I think the POE1 compatibility idea was just sort of starting to become a thing where we can't change this because it would, break this or break that.
另一個原因咧就係喺佢哋 QA 啦，即係佢哋測試團隊裏邊咧，亦都有人反映過，其實我真係有啲擔心。會唔會當 POE2 出咗嘅時候就冇咗 POE1？ 咁呢一樣嘢佢同阿 Mark 咧亦都傾咗好耐，而且咧佢哋亦都隨住時間一路過去啦，就好似我頭先講咁樣，越嚟越多嘢係真係拖後腿嘅，好多嘢佢哋唔夠膽做，佢哋唔夠膽去改，就係因為驚得罪咗 POE1 嘅玩家。 又或者令到 POE1 嘅玩家群唔滿意，所以佢哋希望喺製作一個續作嘅時候，唔好再係咁綁手綁腳，然後就作出咗呢個決定嘅。
Whatever it was. So that's really the reason. And once we decided that, I think we started to get a lot more crazy with the kind of changes that we were doing. So things like WASD, I don't think would have happened under the old model. I don't think we would have been able to accept that kind of thing, just because the mode we were thinking about was much too much a kind of like, we're extending the game rather than making a new game, I think.
喺佢哋完全分拆咗之後咧，佢哋開始就發覺自己嗰個思維啊、嗰個創意咧就可以隨意好多。其中一樣嘢咧就係例如最近所公布嘅 WASD 模式啦，如果仲係用翻原有嗰個新研嘅方式，而唔係依家兩隻 game 拆開咗嚟做嘅方式嘅話咧，基本上係冇可能會發展得到嘅。我諗佢呢一度其中一個最重要嘅或者最關鍵嘅字眼就係原本2019年嗰個理念咧，就只不過係將 POE1 新研落去，而唔係整一隻續作。依家咧佢哋係真係整緊一隻續作。
It was not enough in that direction. So it really just comes down to that. And as for why we want to continue supporting POE1, well, I mean, it's still a great game. It just it's just a bit of a different game. So I think it's absolutely very valuable to support, and a lot of people will still enjoy it. I see no reason why we can't do both.
All right.
而至於另一半嘅問題咧，就係點解會繼續支援或者繼續發展埋 POE1？佢咧就覺得，因為始終 POE1 咧都仲係一隻非常之好玩嘅 game， 雖然唔係同一隻 game， 係一隻唔同嘅 game 啦，但係咧佢哋亦都睇唔到任何原因點解需要放棄咗 POE1 而去單純發展 POE2。
Excellent. I had a question. People were wondering about hideouts. The question they had was, are you going to have bigger or more in-depth hideouts than POE1? But I guess the base question is, are we even going to have hideouts at all?
There'll be hideouts. For sure. Mechanically, I don't think they'll probably change too much. Maybe there's probably more we can do to make them a bit more interesting. But I still really like the whole freeform placement and decorating and all that sort of stuff. I want to keep all of that. It should work the same way. And also the POE1 microtransaction hideouts. I want to still be there, and POE2 you can still use them and just have that as your hideout. That should all come across.
A question.
啱啱嗰個問題咧就係同藏身處 hideout 有關嘅，就有人問到底會唔會仲有 hideout 啦？到底會唔會可以有一啲比較複雜啲、有深度啲嘅 hideout？咁我唔係好清楚呢一個意思係咩咧，即係可能靚啲或者乜嘢之類啦。但係總之個答案就係 POE2 裏邊依然係會有藏身處嘅 ，POE1 裏邊藏身處裝飾咧，亦都可以喺 POE2 裏邊用得到嘅。講緊應該係指你俾錢買咗嗰堆，又或者 supporter pack 裏邊嗰堆嘢咧，又或者可能係。總之 MTX 嗰堆嘢應該係全數可以應用翻落去 POE2 裏邊，sorry。咁如無意外，亦都可以交換到過去拎過去 POE1 裏邊用嘅 POE2 嗰堆裝飾物。
Question was about losing experience on death.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty interesting because right now in POE1, some people like it, some people don't like it. But the landscape for it is like if you run up against the boss where you die, you just look up how to beat the boss, or you look up a build that can beat the boss. But with none of that existing in POE2, I feel like the death penalty, if it was the same, would feel a bit overbearing in some cases.
Yeah. So in campaign, there's no XP penalty in POE2.
Okay.
It's gone. And that's because you're expected to die to the bosses. And basically, as soon as the declaration of "I want you to be dying one to two times for each campaign boss for the first time," kind of implies, well, we can't have an XP penalty then. And also, in POE1, that was the only penalty that actually was anything because of the fact that you could just go resume the boss from where you left off. Whereas now the penalty is that you have to start the boss again. That's enough of a penalty in itself. So that's fine. We don't need the X penalty anymore. But the one question is, what about in maps? And I don't necessarily
呢一條問題咧，就係好似阿 KY 話齋啦 ，no penalty 啊，有人就覺得死亡嘅懲罰咧非常之嚴重啊，喺 POE1 裏邊。咁當然啦，有啲人覺得係太過嚴重，有啲人覺得唔嚴重嘅。阿 Jonathan 咧就住呢一個死亡經驗失去嘅呢一樣嘢咧，就作出澄清。喺過緊章節嘅時候啊，先至唔會有 penalty 啫。即係代表啦，喺過緊章節嘅時候，你可以隨便死都唔會扣斤嘅。最主要嘅原因咧，就係因為佢一開頭都唔係一開頭嘅，佢頭先中間嗰度曾經提及過，希望喺 POE2 裏邊每一隻 boss 都會殺死你1至2次之後，你先至學識點樣打佢嘅。如果喺殺死個 boss 之後，唔係應該話，如果俾個 boss 殺死咗你之後，隻 boss 需要完全重置，再需要扣經驗值嘅話咧，實在太過苛刻啦。所以咧喺過章嘅情況之下咧，係唔會有扣任何經驗值嘅存在嘅。而至於打圖咧，我哋就要聽埋落去啦。
Think that the X penalty is that important in early end game, but I think in late end game it actually is very important, and that's because you need in order to have some kind of challenge to get to make it challenging to get to level 100. You need to have something that's kind of going to make it like effectively a build check, as it were, to make sure that you actually have survivability in your build. And so the X penalty is what makes that allowed to happen. So we definitely need to have an X penalty towards the very end of the game. So I'm not exactly sure what we're going to be doing to sort of kick that in exactly yet, but there'll be some kind of kick in of X penalty towards the later end game to sort of make it so that you still have to actually have a survivable build to get to level 100.
喺 end game 方面啦，佢啱啱就話啦，其實對於大部分嘅人嚟講，早期 end game 死亡扣經驗咧係冇乜大影響嘅。最重要嘅地方咧，就係喺最後嗰一段，佢覺得咧死亡扣經驗值咧係有必要存在嘅，咁樣先至會令到升100 level 呢一個係一個挑戰。而我依家咧要瞄咪線出邊又有警車定唔知咩車聲，唔好意思。好，我翻嚟啦，唔好意思啊。咁因為佢想保持呢一個挑戰性啦，而且呢一個亦都可以係視作為一個你個流派或者你個標係唔係夠圓。連續有2架，唔好意思。anyways， 總之係啦，佢哋就希望可以成為一個尺度，或者攞嚟當係一把尺去睇下你到底嗰個標係咪完整，係咪有妥善嘅生存機制，而唔係純粹係盲頭烏蠅咁係咁衝到去100 level 就算。所以咧，佢哋依然係會有呢一個經驗值嘅懲罰嘅。但係至於喺 end game 邊一個位開始，點樣開始，有乜嘢原因令到呢一個經驗值嘅懲罰開始咧，佢哋暫時係未決定好嘅。唔係好大聲嘅就其實。OK， 我一路都以為好大，因為我呢邊係非常非常之大聲。咁我唔使表 OK， 咁我繼續。
The next question I have, I'll just read it as it was asked, but I do know there's a bit more to it, so I'll add on it a little bit. So the question was, how do we interact with flasks and how many flask slots do we have? I know it's been announced that the flasks kind of will not recover from normal monsters and will be kind of in a way replacing guard skills. So do you have maybe a bit more to add about that?
So basically the philosophy there, so just to talk a little about why we did that, so to have it so that so only blues and above monsters will actually recover life flasks, because
停一停先，呢條問題咧就係關於 flask 會唔會有啲咩改變啦？而且咧，Kripp 亦都話啦，佢知道打白怪係。就算之前個警鐘都唔係太大聲，咁得啦，咁我 OK，good to know，thank you。咁我下次可以唔使特登停嘅。 咁 anyways 翻去佢講緊嘅就係同藥劑有關嘅嘢，就係藥劑喺 POE2 裏邊咧，淨係打8怪係唔會回復充能嘅，而且咧某程度上邊咧藥劑咧使用嘅方式咧，亦都同 POE1 唔同嘅，佢哋唔會 expect 我哋好似依家咁樣呢幾支係長駐嘅藥劑，而係一啲可能某一啲特定嘅情況之下先會使用，所以咧亦都可以話係某程度咧係取代咗類似 guard skill， 即係好似 molten shell 呢啲喺適當嘅時候咧你就使用去幫你進行一啲加強嘅防禦嘅。咁阿 Jonathan 咧就話佢哋要講同藥劑有關嘅咧，就先要由個理念，點解佢哋要改呢個藥劑開始講起嘅。咁喺呢度咧就聽下佢講咩啦。
There wasn't enough state in Path of Exile 1, in my opinion, with regard to your character. And what I mean by that is, and this actually, which one was it? Yeah, I'm talking about Final Fantasy 13, I think it was. Was that the one? I think it was Final Fantasy 13, which is a game I hated. The reason I didn't like it was because your character, you effectively every time, every time you finished a battle in that game, your character was reset to full life. What that meant was is that there were really no resources. Like there was no feeling of like if you fight a group of 5 monsters and you fight the same group of 5 monsters again, it's literally always exactly the same fight because there's no resource that carries on between the fights. And that was a thing that made me really dislike that game because it just felt very grindy because, you know, there was no sort of feeling of tension of like getting, like in previous games in that series, there was this feeling of like, you know, you leave town, you kind of have this like your health is kind of slowly decreasing as you sort of go through the game. And then eventually you run out of resources and you have to go back.
首先咧喺度佢就舉咗一個例子係 Final Fantasy 好似係13定唔知10幾啦，總之佢話其中 Final Fantasy 有一集咧，其中呢一集佢係佢特別唔中意嘅，就係因為每一次戰鬥之後啦，你嘅角色嘅生命值啊等等嗰啲資源咧，全部都會重置嘅。換句話說啦，即係每一場如果你連續撞到2場一模一樣嘅怪嘅話咧，其實嗰2場係一模一樣嘅，因為你都係由滿血滿魔嘅情況之下就可以開始戰鬥噶啦。喺戰鬥同戰鬥之間咧係冇任何嘢係繼承嘅，又或者你唔會 feel 到你嘅角色啊係一路向緊一個唔同嘅方向，或者你嘅資源一路減少緊，令到你每一次戰鬥之後嘅下一場咧，其實都要更加謹慎，因為去為咗未來嘅戰鬥啦，你嗰個資源就必須要保留嘅。呢一樣嘢係佢非常之唔中意嘅，亦都係其中一個原因點解促使佢會有呢一個想改變藥劑嘅原因。
And while I don't necessarily want it to be that you're always going to run out of flask charges in POE2, that is not the case. I do want it to be that it isn't just that you're always on full flask charges, because the flasks have to kind of on some level the flasks are really your health bar. You can recover your life in POE very, very quickly. And so it's really your flask state that is kind of the main state of your character.
喺 POE2 裏邊咧，佢亦都希望有些少可以即係令到每一個 battle 係死啦，呢一個 map 我唔應該入嚟，係唔應該繼承嘅，咁樣就因為始終喺 POE 裏邊啦，特別係 POE2 裏邊啦，佢又覺得呢個生命嘅藥劑啊 ，life flask 啊，其實某程度上邊咧就係你行血量嘅伸延嚟嘅。如果你每一次入去下一個戰鬥之前，你都一定係滿 flask 嘅話咧，咁你每一次基本上就有你依家嘅生命值啦，再加埋嗰個生命藥劑所有嘅能量嘅。但係如果喺 POE2 裏邊，佢可以做到你每一次再戰鬥嘅時候，可能因為你上一次戰鬥用緊咗一啲充能嘅時候，咁依家呢一支藥劑就再唔係滿 charge 啦。變相咧，即係話你有效嘅生命值咧，亦都因為上一次嘅打鬥咧，從而降低嘅。呢一樣嘢佢係希望可以做得到呢個效果出嚟嘅。
And so, like that is something that I kind of want to make still be the case. Now, there's going to be things like leech and so on that's going to allow you to solve those problems that not, like without necessarily using flasks. And then, of course, towards the end game, you're going to be replacing some of your flasks with other things and so on. But I do think that it is important that you don't just feel like every time I kill a pack, I get all of my life flasks, my flask charges back. Mm-hmm. As for guard flasks and things like that, flasks are a nice like resource limiting mechanic that we can use for things where we don't want to have a cooldown, but we do want to have something that you use on occasion. And I think the tension between life, mana, and what other resource that you have is pretty good. But at the same time, we don't want to kind of be flask piano where you're just like constantly, just constantly using them. So ideally, they kind of get to a point where you use them in the right circumstance, you don't use them otherwise, and there's some interesting tension there. And they can serve as a nice resource mechanic that all players have access to, that you can kind of choose, like what you want to use there. So hopefully that kind of gives you some idea. Unless you've got any other questions about any of that, that sort of like kind of.
咁基本上咧就係佢亦都希望大家用嗰個 Flask 嘅時候咧，可以留心啲，注意多些少，實質上係發生緊啲乜嘢嘅事嘅。而且咧 ，Flask 佢本身有一個非常之特別嘅特質啦，就係一個冇 cooldown 可以不停使用嘅嘢嚟嘅。但係咧，佢嘅資源咧又唔會俾你嘅 mana 所限制住嘅，所以咧佢就希望可以再進一步去善用呢一個咁特別嘅特質啦，去令到佢變成可能係好似加 skill， 但係你可以連續使用嘅加 skill， 但係因為你嘅充能咧就會變成咗你嘅限制咁樣樣嘅一個存在，而唔希望咧再有好似 POE1 嗰個 flash piano 咧，即係呢4支藥全部都要撳晒佢先至開心咁樣嗰種嘅情況。
Basic philosophy around flasks.
Personally, no. I'm kind of curious to see what you guys come up with in the final design of it. I think it's one of those things where there's so many factors that come together to like a feel-good flask system. That's really difficult for me to say. I like it because of A, right? It's just the whole thing has to kind of have a good feel to it.
But I will say that not having charges come from normal monsters was an instant game feel upgrade in my opinion. Like when we made that change. And surprisingly, we didn't. Like I thought we would have to buff the amount of flash charges that monsters gave, the ones that do give charges in response to that, and then we just didn't, and it seemed to be fine. So that might not be entirely accurate, but yeah.
喺 Jonathan 佢同阿 Kripp 講呢一度啦，就係佢想知道到底阿 Kripp 會個感覺會係點啊？咁啊 Kripp 就話其實 Flash 呢一樣嘢係好難可以好針對到底邊一個位好，邊一個位唔好。其實主要就係個手感用上去舒服嘅話咧，咁呢一個就係一個好嘅 Flash system。咁佢好好奇到底最後嘅成果會係變成點啦。而阿 Jonathan 佢嘅回應咧就係話喺佢哋設計或者改咗做白怪呢啲小怪唔會俾 flash charge 之後啦，其實成個體驗咧就已經大幅咁樣改善咗噶啦。佢好 surprise 嘅咧就係原本諗住可能要俾 flash charge 即係俾充能嘅嗰堆怪要提升翻所提供嘅充能嘅，但係最後佢哋冇咁樣做到。即使係咁啦，嗰個手感都唔差嘅。咁喺度就容許我加翻少少自己嘅個人意見落去。喺 POE2。Pathfinder 其實 Pathfinder 唔係 POE2，可能都仲喺嘅，但係唔同啫。可能話唔定 Pathfinder 係唯一一個你可以 flash piano 嘅，呢一個係佢嘅特性，都唔奇喎。But anyways，係啦，容許我喺度 fill in 翻少少 ExileCon 嘅手感俾你哋聽，就係當時啦玩戰士嘅時候係發覺嗰個 charge 非常非常之缺乏嘅，可能係習慣成自然啦，一見到怪就已經亂咁撳 flash 嘅啦，係唔係都撳咗佢先？咁基本上打第一，哇！等先，基本上打第一 pack 怪咧就已經係不停咁樣斷 flash 嘅啦，而且喺 ExileCon 裏邊亦都有一個，我諗都算係 bug 嚟嘅，因為人物佢somehow都有嗰個雲源嘅嗰條巴。令到我哋俾小怪嗨一嗨都會加一條巴，你即係當我好似呢啲咁樣血巴下邊有一條巴會令到我暈嗰啲咧，唔單止怪物有，然後我哋自己都有，所以就令到我哋不停咁樣係咁暈。每一次暈完之後咧，你基本上就會想食一個藥劑嘅。當時我自己嘅手感咧係覺得藥劑充能完全唔夠嘅，而亦都係呢一個原因啦。點解佢哋？應該話我亦都係呢個原因啦，我明白咗點解喺 ExileCon 我哋個 demo 裏邊有極之多嘅回城卷軸。咁呢一個係咪所謂嘅遊戲體驗提升咧？我暫時唔能夠認同。 咁當然啦，由 ExileCon 到依家有好多嘢已經唔同咗，甚至乎我哋有埋 WASD 呢個方向，佢亦都話戰士即係我當時最主要玩嘅嗰一隻角色啦，亦都應該係速度上邊有一個根本上嘅提升嘅。咁會唔會變咗唔同咧？拭目以待啦，封測先知啦。
It didn't take much to actually make that change work well, as it turned out.
Okay.
The biggest issue actually was just really early game before you have very many blue and yellow monsters. Because you weren't getting enough charges there. So that's when we made it so that checkpoints give you charges, and that kind of resolved the issue, plus a bit of tweaking about early game flask, like the pool size and a few other details like that, and we kind of managed to get it to feel pretty good, I think.
All right. So a question here is about like casual group play. It said that other ARPGs in the genre generally do it pretty well, but in PoE it felt punishing to play with another person. Is the question that I found online. So I'm kind of curious if PoE2 will kind of address kind of like casual play with other people in ways that PoE1 doesn't, perhaps.
Well, there is a few things we have going on there, but I don't really want to announce any of that right now, unfortunately. But I'm curious to know what the punishing thing is actually referring to with that. Because I don't know that I feel like I am aware
I've been
about
SSF
that issue.
for like 4 years personally, so yes, I don't have much input on this either.
Maybe I'm just terribly misinformed about this, but I guess I'm not aware of the being punishing to play with another person in particular. I mean, sure, the life increases, but you've got more people. I don't know that. I guess I don't know what that's referring to. So.
Okay.
呢一條問題嘅答案係令到我擔心嘅。先講咗呢條問題係咩先？個問題就係到底喺 POE2 裏邊對呢一個 casual group play 啊，即係休閒類型嘅組隊玩法啦，會唔會有所改善？因為依家喺 POE1 裏邊啦，就比較苛刻嘅，即係如果你唔係好 hardcore focus 落去一個 team play 嘅情況，純粹係你同個 friend 一齊決定玩嘅話咧，其實你哋嘅得益咧係明顯地低過一般自己分開玩嘅。咁呢一樣嘢咧，Jonathan 佢就話喺 POE1 裏邊咧，佢就唔係好肯定到底輕鬆咁樣就咁組隊玩嘅話，有乜嘢懲罰喺度嘅？咁佢所諗嘅咧就純粹係可能生命值多咗啊，咁但係你又多咗個人，咁啲怪生命值多咗都係好理所當然嘅啫。咁呢一樣嘢係理解得到嘅，但係我諗佢唔明嘅就係有好多機制啦。你如果係兩個人一齊玩嘅話，可能做唔到啦，又或者第二個人係完全冇受惠啊，又或者推進唔到佢嘅進度，而另一樣嘢咧就係你如果兩個人係純粹一齊玩，而唔係配合地咁樣玩嘅話咧，嗰個效益咧係真係好多時候係低過自己一個人玩嘅。咁佢就話啦，可能係佢 misinform 啦，即係佢唔知道。即係佢所知嘅資料唔準確，所以佢唔係好清楚實質上係發生啲咩事。咁佢希望咧，等其他人可以再話翻俾佢哋聽，實質上係有啲咩問題。咁呢啲就如果你哋有相關又更加準確嘅嘢嘅話，可以考慮下去 Path of Exile 2嘅 subreddit 裏邊提出。因為阿 Jonathan 咧，的確係非常非常之活躍嘅喺裏邊。咁阿 Kripp 佢都話啦，佢自己玩咗4年 SSF， 佢自己可以俾到嘅意見咧，亦都係零嘅。咁所以呢一方面咧，就只能夠靠大家去話翻俾 Jonathan 或者相關團隊知道嘅啫。
I have a question about a character preview with MTX being ported over and its own MTX. Path of Exile 1, you just kind of have to impractically zoom on your character to fully appreciate it.
This is something
呢度打停咗佢先，因為呢條咧係我嘅問題嚟嘅，好開心啊！佢 Kripp 人間中咗，就係關於 MTX preview 或者個角色嘅 preview 啊。咁原本我哋要睇我哋着嗰啲咩咧，就只能夠咁樣嘅啫。咁樣到底 POE2 裏邊會唔會有任何嘅改善呢？呢個就係個問題啦。
That we intend to address, and you should note that because the MTX store is the same in POE1 and 2, that any changes we do make to the MTX store will be in POE1 as well, because they'll have the same shop. So yeah, it's something that I definitely hear. We would like to have MTX preview. We are working on it, and we will hopefully get there before too long. Because yes, I agree, it's something that we really should have.
Jonathan 咧就話啦，佢首先咧就想令到大家明白一樣嘢，由於 POE1 同埋 POE2 兩個係喺同一個 engine 上面運行，特別係個 cache shop 亦都係喺同一個 engine 上面運行。任何 POE2 嘅 cache shop 嘅內容咧，其實喺 POE1 都可以直接應用到嘅。而呢一個 MTX 預覽啦，又或者 MTX 去睇你仲有啲咩 MTX 嗰個 function 咧，佢覺得係有必要存在，佢哋咧係整緊㗎啦。只不過咧係暫時未整好嘅啫，佢希望喺不久嘅將來咧就可以落成到嘅。佢認為呢一樣嘢係有絕對嘅必要存在嘅。換句話說啦，喺 POE1 亦都希望喺真係不久嘅將來啦，希望喺封測或者之前啦，就會有一個新嘅可以預覽 MTX 造型㗎啦。但係咧係有些少難度嘅，喺接落嚟嘅呢一部分咧，佢會解釋。
But I will note that while it's easy for certain things, it is quite hard for others, especially with the complexity around the MTXs these days. So yeah, there's quite a lot of work to do there, but we are intending to do that work. So I'm hoping we'll be able to get that one before too long.
佢啱啱所講咧，就係解釋翻個難度喺邊啦。以往嘅 MTX 啊，你純粹係着件衫、除件衫咁樣就完㗎啦。但係新嘅 MTX 啊，講緊嗰啲寶箱嗰啲咧，可能你用咗招火技，跟住就會光啲啊，等等等等嗰類型嘅嘢咧，就比較難可以做到一個預覽嘅，因為你畢竟就冇嗰啲嘢，甚至乎可能交易嘅時候有兩個拳頭喺度 fist bump 嗰類型嘅嘢，點樣去做到一個預覽咧？佢哋都仲喺度整緊呢一類型嘅嘢，喺度諗緊點樣可以容易啲或者完美啲可以做到一個預覽出嚟嘅，所以咧呢一啲都係需時嘅。
All right. Now, this question doesn't have quite that much meaning to me, but when I opened up the floor to Twitch chat to ask their questions, the one that was spammed like crazy was cross-save/cross-platform play ? So maybe you can do them a favor and give them some insight.
I really do want to talk about this, but our console stuff, we kind of haven't really talked about this yet. But suffice to say, POE2 will be a much better experience on console than POE1 was, and take that answer for what you will. But we're going to be talking a lot more about those details before too long when we talk about what we've got going on console.
呢一個問題咧，就係喺開始接受 Twitch chat 嘅問題嘅時候咧，佢就收到非常之多人問嘅，就係會唔會有 cross play 又或者 cross save 呢一樣嘢嘅。cross play 嘅意思咧，就即係可以，例如我 PC 玩緊啦，然後你喺 Xbox 度玩緊，我哋可以一齊玩，呢個就係 cross play 啦。cross save 嘅意思咧，就係例如我依家喺 PC 度玩緊啦，然後我熄咗隻 game 啦，去我個 Xbox 或者我個 PS 嗰度開隻 game 嚟玩，嗰度咧又可以用翻我同一個角色，呢一個咧就係 cross save 啦。咁到底呢兩樣嘢喺 POE2 裏邊會唔會存在咧？Jonathan 咧喺呢一次嘅答案咧，佢就話暫時咧佢就唔可以公布任何嘢嘅，但係咧就絕對會有一個比較好，即係絕對會喺 console 上邊有一個比較好嘅體驗嘅。然後啦，亦都要加翻些少，就係最近佢同 Gassy 同埋 DM 所做嘅嗰次 podcast 裏邊，佢亦都有再被問過呢一個問題，佢亦都有再答過呢一個問題。嗰個問答裏邊或者嗰個訪談節目嗰個 podcast 裏邊啦，佢所俾嘅答案啦，就係話佢都係唔可以提供任何資訊嘅，因為咧始終同呢一個 console 相關嘅嘢有好多保密協議等等嘅嘢，佢係唔可以咁樣直接公佈嘅，所以咧拭目以待。
With console play being part of the mindfulness of the project, let's say, what might people expect for hardware requirements? Are the ones listed on the Steam page still about right?
I believe that the Steam Path of Exile 2, the Path of Exile 2 Steam page, which you can go to and wishlist, by the way, just to quickly plug that, I should be correct. So I believe that's what's listed on there is like a 960 as the lowest. That's NVIDIA 960 is the lowest spec. And that probably won't be like the most amazing experience ever on that card, but I believe that's what we have as our sort of minimum requirement there.
All right. What is your stance on builds that require 10 plus uniques to function? And
啱啱嗰條問題咧就係話啦，咁既然 console 係一個 focus 啦，即係佢哋會整家用機相關嘅方面啦 ，POE2 會喺家用機嗰度推出啦。咁到底嗰個遊戲嘅最低要求會唔會都唔會係咁苛刻咧？畢竟要符合翻家用機嗰邊都可以暢順嘅體驗。Jonathan 嘅答案咧就話啦，暫時喺 Steam 咧就已經有一版 Path of Exile 2嘅 page 噶啦，咁樣我一間喺個 chat 嗰度打翻俾你哋睇啦。喺裏邊咧就已經有最低嘅配置，嗰個咧就係暫時最準確佢哋所估計或者佢哋所知嘅最低配置嚟嘅最低配置嚟嘅。咁我就啱啱 send 咗條 link 出嚟。好，然後繼續聽啦。
For the example they gave us the Golemaster, so I guess we're including jewels in this list of 10.
I mean, there should absolutely be builds like that, but ideally most builds have some combination of rares and uniques. Would be my opinion. But I mean, yeah, like that kind of thing can happen, right? You want some builds to be expensive and some to be cheap. That's just absolutely a factor. So yeah, there should be some expensive builds out there.
下一個問題咧，有人問啦，到底 Jonathan 佢本人點睇有一啲標咧係需要到10件或以上嘅傳奇先至可以運行得到嘅，例如啦 Golemaster 即係玩魔像嘅元素史。鎖區啊！鎖咗區嘅話，我可以貼幅圖俾你哋嘅，睇個最低配置。等等啊！ anyways， 翻去個問題嗰度先。阿 Jonathan 就話啦，佢覺得冇乜問題嘅，10件傳奇裝備可能係一個比較貴嘅標啦，咁但係絕對喺一隻 game 裏邊係應該有啲平標有啲貴標，佢唔覺得呢一個係一啲咩大嘅問題，而且係應該可以有存在嘅空間嘅。啱啱應該就 send 咗幅圖出嚟㗎啦，咁嗰個就係最低配置嚟嘅，喺 Steam 嗰度拎嘅啫。
Question: How can we get a beta key for POE2?
So we haven't officially announced that yet, but if you look at the 3.0 beta, you should expect something very similar to what happened there.
Okay.
非常簡單嘅一個問題，到底點樣可以拎到 POE2 封測嘅序號，或者點樣可以入到去玩 POE2 嘅封測呢？ Jonathan 嘅答案咧就係暫時未有任何嘢可以公佈，但係你哋可以參考翻當年 POE 3.0.0 Rise of Oriath 嗰一個，唔係 Fall of the Oriath 嗰個 beta 嗰次封測係點樣運行嘅？用最簡單嘅方式去解釋俾大家聽咧，就係其中一個受邀嘅條件咧，就係你需要玩 POE 玩得夠多啦。另外一個條件咧，就係可能喺 POE 裏邊所花嘅金錢夠多啦。而如果兩樣嘢都令到你冇辦法可以入到圍嘅話咧，都仲有第三個可能嘅，就係可以俾錢買封測嘅序號嘅。咁呢三樣嘢係咪一定會存在呢？係咪咁樣存在呢？暫時未確定嘅，佢哋咧都仲係守口如瓶嘅。
About the rearrangement of UI pieces, will there be an option to drag buffs and debuffs around, I guess, for personal customization, clarity type of thing?
I know our UX guy was kind of keen on this, which is possibly what we might potentially allow that. There's sort of various updates to how that stuff works. I guess I'm sort of mostly fine with that. It's probably not that hard to implement, so it's something we could probably do, but I don't want to promise it immediately just because, I'd have to kind of like do a bit more exploration of it. But our UX guy was kind of keen for something like that.
Okay.
下一個問題啦，就係 到底喺 POE2 裏邊，我哋嘅 buff 啦，即係好似上邊呢一行嘅 bar 咁樣先算啦，可唔可以喺界面上邊俾我哋自由移動呢？ Jonathan 嘅答案就話啦，佢哋 UI UX 嗰方面啦，即係界面同埋使用體驗嘅嗰個團隊啦，佢哋就幾想令到呢一樣嘢可以發生得到嘅。佢自己本人嚟講咧，亦都冇乜問題嘅對呢一樣嘢，所以咧佢喺呢度咧唔想應承，唔想承諾我哋一定會做到，但係佢覺得咧應該係會發生嘅。咁呢一樣嘢咧就真係同阿 Chris Wilson 當時俾嘅答案咧係180度嘅轉變嚟嘅。Chris Wilson 係非常之反對界面上邊嘅任何移動嘅，因為之前有人問過可唔可以令到我哋自由喐動呢一啲好似即係唔一定要去到 Warcraft 魔獸世界嗰種咁誇張嘅，但係起碼令到將左邊右邊呢兩個波拉得近啲，放喺中間乜嘢都好啦，又或者將呢一條 buff 下邊最緊要嗰個 debuff 嗰個 bar 放翻喺中間，唔係放喺左上角，我哋唔使打親都喐隻 mouse 過去讀下咁樣嗰種。玩過今季嘅大家都明嘅，一開始嗰隻王要你喐，要你唔喐，你只能夠指落去先知發生緊啲咩事。
So I have a pretty long question here. I'm just trying to understand it, to summarize it a bit. But I guess the question is, how much will you be able to kind of customize an encounter, like, for example, a map, to kind of be something your character can take on? Like, let's say if it's a map with a difficult boss where he'd scale like lightning damage, you wouldn't want to do like a minus max resists in POE1, for example. You have that layer of customizability to curb the challenge. Right. Is something like that going to exist in POE2?
呢條問題就係到底我哋有幾大嘅可塑性啦，對我哋遇到嘅事件。簡單啲嚟講咧，就好似喺 POE1 裏邊，可能我哋知道呢一個地圖嘅王係做一個元素嘅傷害，咁我哋就未必會想嗰張地圖裏邊有減最大抗性咁樣。呢一類型嘅可控性或者可塑性，到底喺 POE2 裏邊係咪依然存在呢？
There will definitely be ways to customize. Like in POE1, there will definitely be things you can do to customize maps. As a starting point, of course, there's just map mods, right? Like just the mods that are on the map, and that's still there and still works largely the same way. Although there will be a lot of the particulars will change a lot as far as the exact mods and everything like that, and the way that the rewards of it scale and this kind of thing. There will also need to be a system that won't be the Atlas tree, like it won't be the same as the Atlas tree, but certainly there needs to be other sources of mods that maps can get in some fashion, and that will come down to the design of the in-game system, which we haven't talked about yet.
佢話呢一樣嘢咧喺 POE2 裏邊依然會存在嘅，而且咧亦都係非常之緊要嘅。而後邊咧亦都會有一樣類似 Atlas tree 啦。即係輿圖天賦啦，但係並唔係輿圖天賦嘅嘢嘅，咁呢一個就同 Endgame 有關，咁暫時咧就未有其他嘢可以公佈得到嘅相關嘅 Endgame system。
But effectively, there will need to be things like that. So hopefully that kind of answers the question about that. But effectively, there'll be the same sort of things you can expect from POE1 and Endgame。
基本上喺 Endgame 嗰個同依家 POE1 嘅 Endgame 咧，都會有個非常之類似嘅嘢，但係咧就只不過唔係1比1嘅輿圖天賦咁解啫。喺度咧亦都想答一答阿 Nam31，佢啱啱問我嘅問題，佢話想問下前邊有冇提及過 Devlog？ 前邊冇，我印象中呢一條片嘅後邊亦都冇，但係喺第二次即係同 Gassy 同 DM 嘅嗰個 podcast 裏邊咧就有提及過 Devlog 嘅。喺關於 Devlog 嗰一樣嘢，佢話佢哋係想整嘅，只不過係有一個非常非常之高嘅難度去製作嘅啫。呢一個純粹係單憑記憶啊，所以唔好每一樣嘢都 take it to fact 咁樣去 quote 我。我印象中佢嘅意思就係，如果要整一個 Devlog 出嚟嘅話，佢可能淨係可以話到俾你聽，最後你所受嘅傷害係乜嘢，然後導致死亡。例如可能我俾一個火球打死咗嘅話，咁樣佢就淨係顯示火球殺死咗我，我最後係受到火嘅傷害而死嘅。但係實質上呢一樣嘢未必係導致你死亡嘅原因。原因咧就係因為可能你咁啱先 嗰一秒俾人感電咗，令到你所承受嘅傷害提高咗50% 咁多，你亦都係因為咁樣，所以原本唔會殺得死你嘅火球變咗殺得死你，所以你真正嘅死亡原因係個感電，而唔係個火球。而要達到可以解釋得到呢一樣嘢呢，就有一個非常之高嘅難度啦。呢一個呢，就係我印象中佢哋所答過嘅原因嚟嘅。咁再詳細啲呢，可能要我之後再翻睇翻嗰一次 podcast 我先至可以答到你啦。希望呢一個可以解答到你。
Where you can customize maps, basically.
Okay, good.
With mods and stuff.
So a question here about the flask system once again. Is there a chance that refilling flasks at wells will be revisited if players don't like it? And maybe I can actually add a little bit of input on this. So in Ruthless, this is how it works. And what I did in my hideout is I put the NPC that refills flasks right next to the portal I normally take when I enter the map. So it's literally like one extra click for me, to the point where, yeah, it doesn't really seem super worth it to have that as a mechanic because you trivialize it anyway. What do you think?
So this is one of those funny little things where, like, it may not seem to matter that much. There's just a tiny little extra bit of making the town cycle feel like it has some purpose. You know what I mean? I do appreciate the fact that in Ruthless, like, sure. I mean, the fact that you can move stuff around in your hideout kind of just means that it ends up in the end game being mostly trivialized. And maybe what that actually means is that for hideouts, we make it so that it works a little bit different, and like it just refills it just refills your flasks automatically while there or something like that. But it was just kind of like just during the campaign, though, it just kind of has the slight feeling of like, like makes the world feel a little bit more kind of, like, I guess it just, you want a bit of physicality to some of these things in some cases. I don't think that once you've kind of done it a little bit in POE2, it doesn't feel particularly wrong at all. We've made sure to place the wells pretty close to where the portals are and this kind of thing. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, we're not in the business of, like, making people hate us for no reason, right? Like if everyone's really, really, really hating it constantly, then I guess we would change it. But, at the same time, I hope people are just fine with it and it won't be a particular issue when you actually play with it in practice.
All right.
好啦，呢一條問題呢，就係關於回城去回約嘅嗰一樣嘢嘅。咁就係有人問係咪真係有必要每一次翻城都要同個口井啦，去回滿你嘅藥劑充能啊等等嗰啲嘢咧，會唔會唔係令到人哋太過自然或者唔係咁舒服咧？會唔會考慮下整走呢一樣嘢咧？咁啊 Kripp 咧，佢就加入一啲佢自己玩殘暴模式嘅體驗啦。喺殘暴模式裏邊啦，你亦都係需要入到去城裏邊，同一個 NPC 又或者喺藏身處裏邊同一個 NPC 講嘢，先至可以回滿你嘅藥劑充能嘅。咁喺殘暴模式裏邊咧就有些少唔同嘅。當你入到去 map 之後咧，你就只需要將嗰一個 NPC 放喺個 portal 門口側邊，咁你就每一次出去撳多一下掣，咁就完咗成件事噶啦。咁成件事咧就變咗好似非常之無謂嘅。係啊，好似 Wildwood 裏邊嗰口井咁上下咯。冇錯，KY 就係嗰口井。咁Jonathan 嘅答案就話啦，咁可能呢一個問題咧，特別係殘暴模式裏邊咧，就唔係嗰口井嘅問題，而係話唔定需要係入到去打圖喺藏身處嘅時候，就識得自然回復，唔需要入到去打圖嘅階段都仲需要你撳嗰個井。但係佢覺得喺過章節嘅時候咧，係有必要令到呢一個即係有呢一個動作，令到你同嗰個城鎮係有翻些少 connection， 又或者有翻些少親切感，令到你覺得係有一個 meaningful， 即係喺個城裏邊有啲嘢做咁樣咯，而唔係一個純粹路過嘅地方。
Excellent. Well, that is my list of questions, and I did kind of go through chat. I know some people still had their own question, but in many cases, I feel like I've in a way interpreted in a different question. So I think this is a good point to kind of put an end to it. An hour and a half, I think, is a digestible format still for most people anticipating Path of Exile and Path of Exile 2. So perhaps we can end on a note. Thank you so much for joining us, and perhaps you can mention when we might expect the next big announcement for POE2 updates or any tidbit of news coming up.
So I don't have any particular date, but I wouldn't think it would be too far into next year when we would be announcing some more stuff. We've got a huge amount of announcements to do next year. We probably need to get started fairly early.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jonathan. I hope.
好啦，咁最後咧就基本上係完結咁滯噶啦。Kripp 嘗試咗佢最後一個問題，就係令到Jonathan 可唔可以透露一下我哋到底幾時會再有同 POE2 相關嘅發布或者嘅資訊發出咧，或者係啲消息發布啦？咁佢就話暫時佢未有一個確實嘅日子，就相信要等到明年啦。呢一條片係2023年嗰陣時錄嘅，明年即係依家啦。係不久嘅將來咧，基本上就會有噶啦，因為佢哋始終要發布或者要公佈嘅嘢咧係非常之多嘅。佢哋每一個角色咧都話會整一條片去講關於嗰個角色嘅。咁我哋暫時好似淨係得幾個嘅啫，而我哋係有 total 12個唔同嘅角色，好大機會啦。下一個咧就係女巫，亦都係好大機會啦，係講同召喚物有關嘅。咁基本上咧，呢一次嘅訪問咧，就嚟到呢一度就作為完結㗎啦。咁我亦都希望我可以做到一個 OK 嘅翻譯俾大家，等大家理解得到底喺佢同Kripp裏邊中間嘅對答咗啲乜嘢，問咗啲乜嘢嘅。咁唔知道你哋對呢一方面嘅 content 有咩感想啦？因為呢一啲平時我就可能會整合咗做一條片嘅，但每一次整做一條片都覺得好似 miss 咗好多嘢，咁我就嘗試下喺個 stream 裏邊做直接翻譯咁樣，可能咧嗰個資訊度會高啲，但係咧要追翻咧就難啲。你哋覺得點咧？亦都可以嘅話就話翻俾我聽。回答翻Nam 頭先所講嘅嘢先，佢哋講嘅唔係喺街上邊會有口井，而係喺個城裏邊，有時而係喺城裏邊有口井咯。咁嗰口井你就當可能呢個係井咁樣撳一下，跟住就會回翻滿咯。佢哋喺第二個 podcast 即係同 Gassy 同埋 DM 兩個嘅嗰個 podcast 裏邊，佢哋有更加詳細去講關於 town cycle 呢一樣嘢，即係喺城鎮裏邊要做嘅嘢嘅。咁我個記憶就唔係太過清晰啦，對嗰一樣嘢要等下次再講呢一樣嘢嘅時候先至可以答翻到你相關嘅問題。到時只會成日唔記得入翻去。呢一方面就應該唔使太擔心嘅。以我玩 Ruthless 嘅經驗嚟講咧，係好快就變咗好自然嘅啦，一兩次之後嘅事。但係就會變咗你玩翻過去 POE1 嘅時候，你就會成日走過去撳個 NPC 咯。值啊！師生室我覺得好緊要啊。其實唔止對我哋嚟講好緊要啦，對佢哋嚟講 marketing 係非常之重要嘅一樣嘢嚟嘅。我唔明點解可以隻 game 10年都冇試身室，認真賣少幾多嘢諗下，連試都冇得試喎，話唔定襯到好靚咧，我唔知啫。boss 前有口井都開心。呢個呢個有冇提及過咧？死啦！我真係唔記得咗。唔肯定，只能夠說唔肯定。但係我諗應該係會有嘅。如果佢係預咗你係會死嘅話，即係佢如果係預咗你個角色係會死嘅話，咁你死咗之後唔通你真係又再翻城又再出翻嚟咩？定係你死咗之後你啲 flash 會回滿城嗰啲？冇理由佢預你一定會死嘅，仲要係預你個 flash charge 唔滿咁樣就去打 boss 噶嘛？冇呢個原因噶嘛？我覺得係咪啊？理論上，所以又有粒 define 啦。係咯，所以我覺得應該係會有嘅。 但係當然啦，呢個係自己個人覺得嘅啫。我都覺得山流會翻嚟，講咗唔知幾多季，講咗唔知幾多年添啦。依家已經去到講起 MTX 就嬲，佢啲嘅 MTX 永遠都係慢一拍。今季第一次玩 Splitting Steel 又冇 skin 買，反而 Lightning Arrow 嗰啲又係咁出。唔係話通常出完 skin 之後下一季就 nerf 㗎啦咩？我個人好啊，我個人唔慢啊，我條經由唔知幾多跌咗去0啦，但係冰吹係啊冰吹，但係唉。好彩開咗呢隻人啫，如果唔係開呢隻人，我都唔知點樣可以分心到咁嘅情況之下都唔使死，好多次應該係死咗啦，好多人嚟講。不過都滿意我對呢隻人，只不過係我頭先阿輝話齋，人哋睇緊嘢唔知我玩緊啲咩咁解啫。但係好玩嘅，不得不承認。剛剛你可以，嗰啲2000粉都冇嘅 RGB 怪，每日得嗰幾百你都得嘅，你信自己？唉，我唔可以是但死咗一隻先，邊隻都好，唔係我。拎翻個 flag 走先，一間可唔可以死咗是但一隻先，跟住就死嗰個係我。好硬啊！但係你望翻人哋行血同我一樣咁硬。仲有 Torment Spirit 玩過嚟嘅啫，玩過嚟。喺度研究緊點樣樣，好似頭先阿 Jonathan 話齋咯，你可以砌到隻人好硬嘅，但係你啲取捨咪就係冇 damn 咯，拗痕咯，齋拗依家。企凳就冇事噶啦，企凳又唔會俾人流血，又唔會食。呢隻咧我就真係冇乜計可以搞掂佢，我同你講。呢啲咁樣中意走嚟走去嗰啲咧，打矛波嗰啲。呢隻都係 RGB 喎，嚟，我都未起到手，佢就走咗啦。翻過去嗰邊啊，唔係呢邊啊。呢正宗磨爛隻喎，呢啲根本就係。你繼續啦，喺呢邊啦。呢次 boss 隻怪之玩。Rook Exile 啊嘛，其實佢曾經都可能係玩家嚟嘅，有冇諗過？好似 Hall of Grandmaster 嗰班，唔好走啊！同埋又唔係 T16咧，T15啫嘛呢個。又冇乜特別難嘅詞，去咗邊啊？邊隻先係你啊？死啦好嘛！等拖翻佢過去嗰邊，唔係呢邊啊！等先，我要你望住我呢邊嘅，其實，啱啦，人啱咗佢嘅位置啊！呢啲就係傳說中嘅拉打，又中咗啦！3字 boss 做你睇下你，原來我唔知佢哋係唔係嚟嘅喎，講真，我淨係知 Hall of Grandmaster 係玩家設計咯，但係 Rook Exile 係咪都係玩家設計定係 GGG 設計嘅咧？咁我唔知啊。Rook Exile 我真係唔知啊。喂，搞掂，一堆垃圾。 應該係啩，係咯，我諗應該係啩。但係 Hall of Grandmaster 係要加，即係你要俾錢去整噶嘛。Rogue Exile 咧，唔知之後 check 翻 Wiki 再話你哋知。但係咧，基本上咧，今晚嘅 stream 咧就差唔多完啦。完之前咧就開埋個獎品。咁話說咧，我就喺病咗段時間咧，就齋喺度做 trading， 就揾到條 Mage Blood 翻嚟嗰啲卡啦。咁到底係幾多支水咧？咁就係預咗係開翻 stream 之後就撳啦。咁結果咧就拖咗咁耐先開。Anyways， 開兩支，同我預計係一模一樣啊！果然係最低 roll。兩支啊！好啦，係時候大家估下，到底要用幾多粒 define 先至可以將佢變咗做4支啊？D 梗係 D 下去啦，但係要用幾多個啫？3次之內得唔得啊？一次係3，第二次係3，真似一樣。第3，真係3次之內喎，搞掂。係咁樣樣。好，4水，搞掂。好啦，咁跟住咧就到咗呢一隻人嘅提升啦，有呢一條 Mage Blood。咁到底要點提升咧？暫時未諗到。唔係嘅，其實係有少少諗法嘅。我喺 POB 度模擬過啦。假設我有呢一個 Mage Blood 啦，跟住然後我再有3色 RGB 水啦，基本上就係即係咩火礦啊、電礦啊、冰礦啊呢3支拍滿咗佢有25 increase。屌你 ，no boss， 走先，熄翻個 global 睇唔到。基本上係啦，有呢幾支水，跟住有 increase effect， 有埋70% increase effect 嗰個 enchant 嘅話咧，依家呢一隻角色咧就應該可以彈到 memory game 噶啦。咁相信啦，喺彈到 memory game 嘅情況之下啦，呢隻人要打 Maven 咧就唔係咁難嘅。而至於個時間咧，我就唔知要幾耐。唉，好 ，anyways， 多謝晒咁多位今晚嘅支持，同埋係啦，你哋得嘅話就 Eda 私底下話我知又好，點樣都好啦，話俾我知你哋對呢一種即係睇翻POE 佢啲 dev 喺度講嘢，跟住然後我即場翻譯翻嘅呢一種做法，感覺如何？可以嘅話就話翻俾我知啦，係咁先啦。咁多位晚安啦 ，thank you for support。